Welcome to the Nick Standlea Show. Today we're talking about mindfulness. Today I'm talking to Micha Shaw. She's a mindfulness coach for elite athletes. Micha was an incredible athlete herself, and we're going to get into the story of her competing in the Olympic trials for the United States of America. But in line with the subject that we're discussing today, I don't want to talk too much about Micha's past experiences or what we're going to talk about in the future of this episode. I want to keep it right here in the present moment. Okay, enjoy this conversation with Micha Shaw. Mindfulness is the awareness that emerges through paying attention on purpose in the present moment and non-judgmentally to the unfolding of experience, moment by moment. Jon Kabat-Zinn.
Yeah, that's my favorite quote and definition of mindfulness, because I think it's so simple, but there's so much in that one sentence.
Yeah.
So many people think mindfulness is just being present, but it's so much more than that. It's the awareness aspect, the focus, and then the non-judgmental part, which I think is what maybe people have the hardest time with.
Right.
Is just accepting. That's what I always remind myself when I'm practicing or just living my life, is accepting the present moment for what it is without trying to push it away if it's not a great moment, or when we're in a joyful moment and everything's great, trying to hold on to it and make it last and forcing that sort of joy to continue, even though it's run its course and we're on to the next moment.
Right. Yeah, John, non-judgmental, I feel like, is more accessible than the don't worry about the things you can't control, focus on the things you can. Like sometimes people get frustrated with that because we all worry about things we can't control. We're always worried about outcomes. And I find it's helpful to come back to that. Just try not to have judgment about it. And then suddenly you stop worrying about the things you can't control just by focusing on being non-judgmental, just being aware. We're just here.
Yeah.
This is happening. We're just having a conversation.
Exactly. I think it helps set the foundation, though. Like, I use control the controllables all the time. I feel like it's one of the most, I shouldn't say overused, because it is really important. Like, we freak out about things that have no bearing in reality or are never going to happen. And it's like, is that helping you? No. Okay. So what can you focus on instead? But when you start to practice mindfulness and you practice being non-judgmental, because I think it is a practice. It's not something you just achieve or you're really good at. It's okay that you're not good at it, but you set that foundation. And then when you are having these thoughts and noticing these things that are outside of your control, you can notice them without taking them on as like your identity. Mm-hmm. You can let them sort of be and have their space and be like, oh, okay, I see you. I'm just going to let you be, and I'm going to focus on something else. So I think it helps with the controllables. It's like a good foundation to start from.
Yeah. Expand on that a little bit more. Control the controllables.
Well, I always think in terms of working with athletes. So or just in my own experience. So I did open water swimming. There's a lot of things in open water swimming that are completely out of your control. Not mostly, but the weather is a big one, the conditions that you're in. So if I freak out over the conditions and let that affect my race, I have no control over the weather. I have no control over the conditions, but I do have control over how I prepare for that race, how I practice, and the attitude and effort that I show up on race day. So if I'm hyper focused on the conditions and I don't like them and they're not ideal for me, I'm most likely not going to show up and perform at my best because my mind's focused on something completely like out there that's not helping me.
Right.
But if I can accept the fact that these conditions are not ideal for me, but I'm going to give my best effort anyways, so that gives me like a place to move forward.
Yeah.
And then if I can take it a step further and look at those horrible conditions and say, this is where I thrive, like, even if it's not really where I thrive. Yeah. But if I'm like, this is like, everybody's in the same conditions, we're all going to be struggling, but like, I have that inner drive, or, you know, I'm going to be competitive. This is where I thrive, and I'm going to make this potential weakness like one of my strengths.
Do you find it's helpful to reframe things in terms of defining success around the controllables?
I think defining success is a hard one. I think of like process versus outcome when we come to defining success, because I think, and that is control the controllables, right? You can do everything in your power to be the best person, athlete, parent you can be, or whatever to be, but you're not always in control of the outcome. So I could show up on race day. I could have trained, to the best of my ability, eaten all of the nutritious foods to fuel my body, slept 10 hours a day, like done everything I could to be the best I can be. But I can still show up and give my best effort and not win. But if my whole focus is on, in order for me to have value, I have to win, I'm going to be really disappointed. But if I'm really focused on the process and the fact that, and being able to acknowledge, like, I've done my absolute best. I showed up, I gave 100% of the effort that I had today. And I'm proud of myself because I did the best I could. And it just wasn't, unfortunately, good enough for first place. And I think a lot of athletes are competitive people in general. It's that outcome, like, I have to be first, but you can't control that.
Right. And that's what I mean by defining success. So if you define success as the process and the preparation, did you actually do everything you could to be the best you could be on that particular day? If we define that as success,
yes.
Eventually, if you keep doing that, results will take care of themselves, but they're not always under your control. So it's dangerous to define success by the results.
Yes. Agree. 100%.
All right, let's get into your background a little bit. So you coach athletes now in their mindfulness practice. Let's start with how your athletic experience and then build up to how you became a coach and decided to do this and why mindfulness is important to you, especially with athletes.
Okay. Yeah. So I grew up all over the place. I grew up in South Africa, Washington, Alaska, and England. And swimming, diving was my first sport that I loved. But then we moved to Alaska when I was in junior high and they didn't have diving. So I stuck with swimming. And the only reason I say that is that I grew up in like a really small competitive bubble. Alaska is not like the swimming mecca of the United States. So when I was good in Alaska, I was competitive, but I didn't really have a lot of experience with like people outside of the state. Especially, I never went to nationals. I wasn't like a nationally ranked athlete. Then I transferred to Golden West College and swam and played water polo there. And then I transferred to Cal.
Okay.
And that was kind of where my...
Cal Berkeley, just to be...
Yes.
Yeah. And Golden West, which is in California.
Yes,
and then to
Huntington
Cal
Beach,
Berkeley. Yeah.
So when I transferred to Berkeley, I was so intimidated because it was the first time that I really was like outside of a bubble. Some of my teammates were Olympians, world record holders. We were competing against other national champions, Olympians. And I just felt like totally out of my element. For the first time, I've always been like a very nervous person, a very nervous athlete. But when I went to Cal, it just felt like I didn't know how to control it. It just seemed like this really big problem. And that's sort of when my mental skills journey began, not from a place of like understanding what I could do, but just from this awareness of I'm getting in my own way and I don't know what to do to get out of my way. But I always felt like I could be better, but I didn't really see that. I mean, I improved when I was in college, but when I graduated, I had no real reason to swim professionally. I wasn't nationally ranked. I needed to make money. So I was done with swimming like most people. But I felt like I wish I could have kept going. I felt like I still had a lot of room for improvement. So I didn't feel most of my teammates were really excited to retire and move on. They were like, yes, I can't wait to not wake up at 5 a.m. and swim 5 hours a day and just like live my life. But I didn't feel that way. I still felt like there was still something there for me to explore. But I moved down here, back down to Southern California to be with Logan. And
Your husband,
my
great
husband, sorry.
guy.
Yeah.
Let's give a little shout out to Logan.
I moved back down here and had no clue what I wanted to do professionally. I was lifeguarding. I did all the lifeguard competitions. When I was in college, I did open water swimming races, and I loved it just for fun. And I started going to nursing school because my father-in-law, actually, Logan's dad, was like, you should be a nurse. And I had no clue what to do. And I was like, okay, I'll be a nurse.
Okay.
I didn't really think it through, which I laugh about now because I would be a horrible nurse.
Because you're not a nurse.
No,
yeah.
I'm not a nurse. And the moment, so I was swimming masters, and one of the guys that I was swimming with was like, hey, did you know that open water swimming is now an Olympic event for 2008? It was the first time it was in the Olympics.
And what is masters?
It's just like anybody that wants to swim outside of college.
Oh, okay.
So masters swimming, they have masters tennis, water polo, like any sports. I guess it's just people that aren't competitive in college or elite athletes, just anybody that wants to be in a sport. And
so it's still a high level, but not.
No, not necessarily. I mean, you could just show up and swim like once a week.
Oh, okay.
But you're part of like a team.
Okay.
And you get to have a coach tell you what to do, which I always like.
Yeah.
You're just not showing up by yourself and doing it alone.
Okay.
So you have a little bit of a community. And if you want to be competitive with it, you can. So I was doing masters, and this guy is like, oh, open water is an Olympic event. And I think I told my dad, and he was like, you should do it. I'll support you. And I did. I stopped taking classes for nursing school, dropped that as fast as I could.
Yeah.
But I guess what was unique about my journey up until that point is that I didn't really have the resume to quit everything and become a professional athlete. In college, I swam the 200 and 500. I don't know how familiar you are with swimming. I was mid-distance.
Yeah. I know that's somewhere in the middle. Yeah. I'm definitely not an expert on swimming races. Okay.
I also swam like my senior year at Cal, I swam the 100 and 200. So I was more of a sprinter.
Right.
To mid-distance swimmer than I was a pure distance swimmer. So I went from doing mid-distance in a pool to training full-time to make the Olympics in an event I'd never done before, which is a 10K, which is 6 miles and takes about 2 hours. And
so it's almost like switching from sprinting to a marathon.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's a fair assessment. Okay. But I loved being I had this idea that I was going to be like a mermaid. Like I was going to train in Huntington every day, like body surfing, swimming around the pier, just doing long swims, and it was going to be really great. And I ended up joining the Mission Viejo Nadadores, which is in Mission Viejo, and they're a very well-known swim team. And their coach there is well known for training distance swimmers. And he had sort of a group of open water swimmers there too.
Okay.
So I started training there, and I knew that I had to work on the mental side more, just as much as the physical. Mm-hmm. But back then there wasn't that much information, especially within like college. No one ever talked about like the mental side, or, I mean, most of my coaches were really verging on the side of abusive and not very nice. So any type of, there just wasn't any mental health support or talk about that, or like, it was just work harder. That was what I learned. It's just work harder and all your problems will go away, which didn't work. So when I started swimming professionally, I bought all the books. I went to Barnes & Noble. I remember this vividly. I bought like every book on sports psychology and started reading all the books. And one of the books that I really liked was called The Mental Edge by Ken Baum. And I read the book. I really liked it. In the back, it was like, for more resources, call this number. And I called the number and he answered.
Whoa.
And he was like, oh, why do you want more resources? And I was like, well, I'm training for the Olympics, an event I've never done before.
Right.
And he was like, oh, where are you? And I was like, well, I'm in Mission Viejo. And he's like, I'm in San Clemente.
Yeah.
So I ended up going down there and meeting him. And I worked with him for 2 years. He trained me for free.
Yeah. Wow.
And it changed my life in a very positive way. So I was able to dedicate just as much time to the mental as the physical, and I made a lot of improvements. And I don't know, I'm already kind of long-winded on this story, but I ended up winning the qualifications to make the Olympics is kind of confusing. I won the first stage, which was the US trials. So I got first, which gave me the opportunity to go to the World Championships.
Okay.
Where at the World Championships, if I was in the top 10, I would automatically qualify for the Olympics.
Okay.
But only 25 people in the world qualified for the Olympics. So there was sort of a selection process after that to fill in the rest of the athletes.
Okay.
Whereas in pool swimming, 2 people per event make it from the US.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a little different because you're not guaranteed a spot based on your country unless you're the host country. So in 2008, it was Beijing. So China would get 1 spot.
Okay.
Automatically. So I made it to the World Championships and I did not make it.
But you won for the U.S.
Yes.
So you were the top female swimmer for the U.S.
Yes.
And then in the World Championships, basically the U.S. did not get a slot then.
So no. So it was the best learning experience at the wrong time. It just broke my heart.
Yeah.
I don't remember what place I got. I think there was something like 75 athletes, which was a lot for open water swimming. And open water swimming is kind of like cycling where you swim in a peloton or you swim in a pack, but like cycling in a peloton.
Yeah.
But you're in the water, so it can be very aggressive and people are swimming over you, pulling on your legs.
Right.
You can get into, like, if you're not in a good position in the pack, it can make or break your race.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not the most physically intimidating person.
Yeah.
And my skill set was not beating people up in the water.
Right.
I worked really hard on like controlling my emotional response. So if someone did hit me, instead of trying to retaliate, I would like just try to like not have any reaction to it.
Right.
And I was able to build that skill up quite well. But that was a very trying day. It just was like a constant battle the whole time. I think I don't even remember my place. I think I was like 30 in the 30s. And the other American, I think, was in the like 20s. So we didn't do particularly well. A lot of people didn't do particularly well. It was just an insane day.
And it all came down to that one day.
Yeah. Okay. Well, for me, it did.
Okay.
So, because it was a new sport, a new event at the Olympics, and it wasn't, the selection process was kind of confusing and it got a little political. So the 2 of us were the top 2 and we didn't make it. So we should have gone on to the next one, which was a race in Beijing, where I think 1 person could qualify. So it would have been sort of a race between the 2 of us. But ultimately, USA Swimming sent someone else instead of me.
Where was this person at the trials and the...
They got 3rd.
And
they're amazing swimmers. So
still 3rd.
Yeah.
Not 1st or 2nd. That seems a strange choice.
I mean...
And they just got to pick one. It wasn't a merit-based system. It was a subjective choice. They just said, hey, we think this is the person we want to put in there. And that was that.
I don't really know. Honestly, it was the most heartbreaking experience for me.
Yeah.
And it took, I feel like even now when I talk about it, it's like, I don't want it. I don't like it. She had the better resume than I did. But, and apparently, the hard thing is that my coach was coach for both of us. So he was in kind of a hard situation. And I didn't really want to know what his perspective on it was, because I didn't want to know that maybe he said she should go instead of me. And I heard things that were going on behind the scenes that were really hurtful. And that was hard to process. And then years later, someone came, they were like, oh, they changed the rules. They're not allowed to do that anymore. So it was like kind of like the precedent of, I got to be the precedent, which doesn't feel good either.
Yeah.
In that regard. But that was the reality of the situation that I had to work on accepting.
Right.
Which took a while.
That's a tough one.
Yeah.
You did win the USA trial, though.
Yes.
And that, nobody can take that away.
No.
I mean, that's a pretty big one.
Yeah.
Like, that's a really big deal, especially that whole journey in an event that wasn't your event through college.
Yeah.
It was this dramatic change. And then, wow, if it was a movie, they wouldn't end it that way.
No, it would be like some good comeback story, you know?
Yeah.
And I tried to come back, and I started swimming. The race was in Spain. I came home. Logan proposed like the day I came home.
Okay.
So, it was the most emotional roller coaster I think I've ever been on. I literally would be bawling my eyes out and then like laughing hysterically, like, oh my God, I'm engaged. And bawling my eyes out. And I remember I went to practice, I think the next day. And I was like, I'm getting married. And my coach just sat there and he was like, uh-huh. And he just like waited and didn't say anything. And then I was just bawling. I was like, my life's over.
So this is right after you found out you were not going to advance.
Yeah.
And then Logan thought, well, it's a perfect time to pop the question.
Yeah.
Okay. And what happens after that?
Well, I guess I should say when at the World Champion, I swam 2 25Ks in my life. I know when you interviewed Hank and he talked about swimming to Catalina, I was listening to that episode and I was like, oh my gosh, I almost feel like I need to swim to Catalina to maybe with Hank to feel the joy of doing a swim like that, because I did 2 25Ks and felt like utter sadness. And the first 25K I did was at the national championships. And I think my coach wanted me to do it because he didn't think I would win the trials and he wanted to like prolong my career a little bit. Okay. So he was like, at nationals, you should swim the 25K. If you get top 2, you got to go to the world championships. And I was like, I don't want to swim the 25K. There's a big difference between a 10K and a 25K. Okay. The 10K is 2 hours. A 25K is 6 hours. And you should train for a 25K. I was not. I was training for a 10K. So there's a big difference. But I swam the first 25K and I got second. So I qualified to swim the 25K at the World Championships too. And I didn't like that race. Logan was on the boat. It was around an island in Florida. Okay. And we literally just swim around the entire island. And I think it took me like 6.5 hours. Yeah. And it's a weird thing. It's like sensory deprivation. You just start slow and you just get slower. That was my experience, at least, is that there wasn't a lot of like pace, like, oh, I'm going to pick up my pace now. It's just like your body just starts to shut down. And after 6 hours, it's just like the only thing I could hear was water in my ears. And Logan was on the boat and he had like a little whiteboard and he would send messages to me. But I felt like I was trapped in my head. Like I could see him, but I couldn't really talk. And when I did stop and try to like feed or take liquid, I felt like I couldn't say anything. Like I was just trapped in my head. Yeah. So that was my first experience. And then the second one was at the World Championships. And it was, the 10K was the first event. And then it was the 5K and then the 25K. And as soon as the 10K was done, I heard people talking, like, not as soon, but like that day, the next day, about maybe I wasn't going to be the person that was going to get to go to Beijing for the next qualifier. And I knew that how I did on the 25K mattered.
Because you did well.
Because I did like the next 25K, which was a couple days after the 10K.
Okay.
So I knew that I was going to be judged on how I swam this 25K. And it felt so frustrating and hopeless because from the day that I did the first 25K, I was like, I'm not acknowledging that I'm swimming 25K. Like, I'm not thinking about it. Right. I'm only focused on the 10K. I want to make the Olympics. The 25, it doesn't matter. I never trained for the 25K. So then to have to swim it again and for it to matter beyond just like trying to, being able to represent your country at the World Championships, which is an amazing experience, and wanting to do the best you can because you're a competitive athlete. But knowing that if I did well, I might get picked to move on. But if I don't do well, they're not going to pick me. And it's like an event that's like completely out of my wheelhouse. And
very different from the 10K.
Very different. Yeah. The 10K, you can have like a little bit of speed and you can race. And at the end, it's like a sprint. And so you can conserve your energy. I think a 2-hour race, like from an endurance standpoint, I love that. Like you can settle into kind of a faster pace. Whereas for the 25K, it's just like, hold on. And everybody goes really slow. And then the people that train for it are able to like switch their speed up and like make a run for it. But it's hard to go really slow. It sounds like it would be easy. It's hard to go really slow for a long time and then to switch to going fast. At least it was for me.
No, that makes sense. And yeah, I think you should do a Catalina swim with Hank. And we should take some cameras out there and document the whole experience.
I don't know. I mean, he's very optimistic and like it would probably be good. Now I feel like if I were to do it after all the work that I've done, I would choose to do it from a place of joy and want to. And I think it would be a different experience. I didn't have that mindset then. I just felt like I felt very hopeless. So when I swam it at the World Championships, I don't think I did poorly. I just didn't do great. But I got hyperthermic like halfway through. So I was shivering for 3 hours all by myself. I could see my coach. It was the same thing. It was like I was just like trapped in my head. And I was like, you're in a prison cellar. You just can't get out. And there's like no... Like you can't say to someone across from you, like, I'm struggling right now. I like really need help. You're just stuck there. It's a really weird experience. 6 hours face down in the black velvet. Yeah. As Hank says. Yeah. Yeah. And it's just you. Yeah. Yeah. And almost like your body, like not your body though, because your body is like, so it's just past this point of exhaustion when your body is just like really slow and like you're swimming through syrup or something. So it's really weird. I got out of the race and one of the coaches are like, are you okay? And I couldn't talk. Like, I don't think I could talk for like an hour. And she came, I just remember she walked me to the hotel and I had to like I was super cold and I just sat in the bathtub and she just sat in the bathroom with me. And I just sat, like, I was like, I should say something to her. I couldn't. I couldn't like open my mouth and just say like, hi, or I'm not happy right now. It just was like all inside my head. Well, there's an immense amount of pressure throughout that whole experience, which has something to do with it. I mean, it's not like you're doing a Catalina to Long Beach swim for the joy of it, as you said. I mean, you're at the World Championships in a hyper competitive environment against the top athletes in the world in this sport. And you're playing for a spot at the Olympics. I mean, that's just going to be a very different experience. Yeah. And you throw into the mix all the stuff you're dealing with in terms of having to do this long race that for some strange reason that I don't completely understand impacts your chance to go in this other race that's not even half as long. Yeah. That's a lot to deal with all at once. That would deal with that would cause some mindfulness challenges. Yes. I did not have mindfulness back then. So I definitely didn't have I think I did a lot of work on more traditional sports psychology practices, which were very helpful. And I think I wouldn't have been able to improve and to get to the point that I did without them.
Right.
But coming back to I discovered mindfulness after my swimming career, after I finally went to therapy for the first time after I had kids, and started to actually talk about my experience, because I just held everything inside. I think the first time I was on a podcast and talked about it, Logan was like, I didn't realize that you felt that way. Because I just pretend that was my coping mechanism growing up, is just hold it in and pretend everything's fine. So that's what I did after I stopped swimming. I was just like, everything's fine. But it wasn't inside.
Well, it sounds like it's modeling some of the behavior that you were taught by your coaches throughout swimming, which was, well, it's fine, just work harder. Yes,
absolutely.
All that mumbo jumbo of what's going on upstairs, that doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It's about just get in there and get more reps.
Yeah.
And I think anybody that's been in an athletic environment when it gets serious has dealt with coaches like that. And I love the work that you're doing now, because what's interesting to me about mindfulness for athletes in particular is that it's not just that it's good for your mental health and to help you be a better person. It also improves performance.
Mm-hmm.
And it is this win-win. Although I think it's difficult for a lot of old school coaches and trainers to wrap their head around it. And so they kind of ignore it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I always think that's interesting with talking with coaches, because some of them really buy into the mental side. Some of them buy into it, but they don't really want to train it. Mm-hmm. They're like, oh, it's so important, but we're not going to do anything about it, which is confusing. And then, more old school coaches of just shut up, mm-hmm. put your head down, work hard. Talking about your emotions is weakness. Being nice to yourself is weakness.
Right.
And I think things are changing. Obviously, there's more of a spotlight on mental health and just all the different aspects of mindset when it comes to competing. So I think we're going in the right direction.
So if you were the mindfulness coach for Micha Shaw at that time, how would you coach yourself?
Oh, that's a good question. I've never actually thought of it that way. So when you practice mindfulness or meditation, a lot of times people think they can't meditate because their mind's too active and they are supposed to turn off their thoughts. But that's mm-hmm. not the case. So every time we meditate, we go through this cycle. We focus on something in the present moment. So you might hear it like a present moment anchor, object of meditation. A lot of times you use your breath, mm-hmm. which is my favorite way, because you always have your breath, and your breath is also a powerful tool for athletes and just anybody in general. So you focus on your breath and you try to watch your breath without controlling it or judging it, but your mind is going to wander. And it's that magic little moment where you notice oh, my mind has wandered. I'm thinking about lunch or I'm thinking about my next training session or whatever, or that mistake I made 4 months ago. And you notice it, and then you choose to let it be and then come back to your breath. So you go through this cycle. You focus, you get distracted, you notice you're distracted, you refocus, and you do that over and over again. And then when you practice it consistently, you start to see that cycle show up in your life, that you're doing something, you get distracted, and you can let that be and let it go and come back to the present moment. I hate saying let it go because it feels that's always marketed as being this easy process, and it's not, at least not for me. So I like to say let it be, it can just be there. You can acknowledge it without trying to push it away or whatnot. So I think if I were to look back on my experience, if I were able to see that cycle play out more, I think I would have been able to give myself a lot more credit for the accomplishments that I made. I think I would have been able to articulate how I felt and said something sooner. I think I would have been able to stand up for myself. So I think a lot of things would be different.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's why when I started meditating, I originally started because I had 2 really young kids and I felt desperate for a moment to myself. And I'm an introvert, so I need some quiet time to recharge. And I started meditating, and when I started practicing consistently, I was like, wow, just this little moment really changes how I feel throughout the day. I just feel like a little bit more patient and capable to handle motherhood. And then I started thinking, well, what would it have been like if I would have known this when I was swimming? What would the difference have been like? And the big difference that I think of a lot is just how horrible I was to myself, but I didn't have any awareness around it. So I didn't realize how destructive my thoughts were, how mean I was. I set this really high standard for myself, and that's what's helping me be a better athlete. But I think had I been able to compete with this more openness of not being so rigid and hard on myself all the time, I would have performed a lot better. And that's something that I'm really curious about exploring now. And I just also for other athletes, I think so much of the time we're told that we kind of have to be mean to ourselves to perform well. And I don't think that's the case anymore.
Yeah. It's interesting you mentioned you would give yourself more credit for your accomplishments, because I noticed it even when you were telling your story. You're like, well, I swam at Cal, but most people were better than me or had stronger resumes. Just being able to make the team and stay on the team for 4 years of college at a huge college like Berkeley is a really big deal.
Yeah.
And then it takes a long time in your story to get to, oh yeah, and I won the Olympic trials, and then you zipped on to the next thing. And I was like, whoa, could we pause on that for a second? That's a really big deal.
Yeah.
And then you're competing. I mean, you qualified for the world championships. Those are monumental accomplishments. And it's great to be humble, of course. And it's charming and everybody likes that. But I noticed, I thought, we could take a beat here to just appreciate what a big deal that is.
Yeah.
How does that tie back to your reluctance to really acknowledge those huge accomplishments? How does that tie back to those negative thoughts that you had back then and kind of your journey up until now?
Yeah. Well, I'll start by saying I'm a work in progress. So I've improved a lot, but I'm still working on it.
Aren't we all?
Yeah. I think I know I'm not alone in this. I always had these really high goals, but then if I achieved it, I felt like, well, I've achieved it. It's not so impressive anymore. On to the next.
Yeah.
And so if I did well, I was like, whatever, moving on, goal set higher, let's keep achieving. Did not give myself credit for it. But what I did like to do, but I wasn't super aware of, was hold on to all of my mistakes and failures and continuously beat myself up for them. Right. So the success was short-lived. I enjoyed it. I mean, I remember vividly winning the US trials. It was an amazing day of my life. Logan, unfortunately, wasn't there, but his dad was there, and he squeezed me so hard when I got out of the water. And I just remember just being shocked that I had done it, and very happy. But then it was like on to the next. So it was short-lived, that part of it.
Is there an element there of, well, if I can do it, then it must not be that big of an achievement?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I still struggle with that. I'm working on it, but it's still really hard. Yeah. When I went through graduate school and everyone's like, that's such a big accomplishment. I'm like, is it? Because I'm doing it. And it's not like I'm intentionally saying, well, you're doing it, so it's not a big deal. I just think that's like it's an ingrained habit within myself. And it's not something that when I did graduate from grad school, I threw myself a party and I was like, I'm really proud of myself. So there's definitely improvements along the way. But I think in general, I'm still not very good at giving myself credit.
I think it's
for accomplishments.
Common for a lot of high performers.
Absolutely.
And it's great that you're doing the work to sort this stuff out. I am thinking of one of my other good friends who just finished a 50K race. And I called him afterwards and he was like, yeah, what's up? And I was like, well, maybe we should take a second to celebrate this because you're in your 50s and you just knocked out a 50K and did really well at it. Like, let's just acknowledge that and celebrate that for a second. And he was like, yeah, that's something other people do.
Yeah.
And just to say that, I think that's a common struggle for a lot of super high performers because you're always looking at the next thing. You're highly motivated to push on to bigger and better. You're not going to rest on your laurels. So it's like this double-edged sword.
Yeah.
And probably the healthiest place is to find a little balance with acknowledging badass accomplishments like the ones we've gone over here, swimming wise or finishing graduate school, and always still looking towards the future and what's going to come next. Because you don't want to just sit back on the couch and be like, man, I was really good 20 years ago at that one thing and never move on to something new. So it's a balance, right?
I don't know if balance exists. I don't know. I think it's a struggle. Now that I've worked with like more athletes and done more research and just like practice in life, a lot of the things I experienced are so common. And I think with high achievers, some of the aspects that make us high achievers are also kind of problematic.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I kind of wonder, like, because I do stress sometimes, I'm like, okay, I could be more kind to myself. I think that's really important. And I work with that with athletes. But you also have to do the work. Like, you also have to work really hard. And some of the things that make us successful might not always be the best coping skill. So what do you do with that? Like, and I think that's like a very fine line of acceptance, curiosity, kindness, and that we're human. We're not always going to get everything right. Some things are not helpful. And I think like me being really mean to myself and never giving myself credit, like, I think I could be a high performer and not do that.
Right.
So maybe I can learn to sort of like let that go. But there's probably other aspects of my personality and like how I work that are still somewhat problematic. And am I going to be able to sort of like weed out all of those things? I don't know. Like, not anytime soon, probably.
Well, and maybe you don't want to weed those things out. I mean, I've come to a new understanding of anxiety as it's really a matter of degree with anxiety, if it is a good force or a negative force.
Yeah.
Because a little bit of anxiety means you are simply concerned about something in the future, and it can motivate you to take steps towards something that you want to accomplish in the future, which is a net positive for most people. Yeah. But if the anxiety meter starts to get to too high of a degree, it becomes paralyzing. Then there are all these negative aspects to it. And so I think you're right. Balance is probably not the right word, but finding where to adjust the dials.
Yeah, I like that. Because I think for a lot of things, it is like you're on like a razor's edge. Mm-hmm. It's not this clear path that's easy to define.
Right.
It's really easy to tip over either way.
Mm-hmm.
And that sort of journey of understanding, I go through that a lot with like athletes that are injured or burnt out. It's like you have to learn when it's okay to rest and to take that rest. But then sometimes you're going to be tired and you're going to have to push through. But you have to know what's the difference. Like, are you tired and you need to push through? This is like a learning moment, a growth moment, or are you pushing through out of stubbornness and you're going to injure yourself?
Right. And they're very fine differences.
Very fine. Yeah,
a razor's edge is a good description.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was toying with this idea this morning that when people talk about mindfulness, we're often trying to find the optimal setting for ourselves. I mean, I think I found this one, Lao Tzu, and this is like a famous quote about mindfulness. If you are depressed, you are living in the past. If you are anxious, you are living in the future. If you are at peace, you are living in the present. And so we hear something like that and go, oh, that's a piece of knowledge. I need to live in the present. That's the right setting.
Yeah.
And that thinking of mindfulness as being static is probably not helpful, because none of us can be fully in the present moment all the time, nor would we want to be. It's difficult to function that way all the time. And I was thinking that maybe mindfulness is more like having 3 sliders that you would adjust up and down, one for the past and how much we're going to think about it, and then one for the present and how dialed into the present moment we're going to be, and one for the future, because all 3 of those things need to happen to some degree throughout our lives. We can't ignore the past completely because we have to learn from those mistakes. Yeah. And we can't ignore the future because we want to have goals that we're moving towards. And I thought that might be an interesting way to think about mindfulness, where it never ends. You never have like figured out the optimal setting. No. You're just adjusting these things all the time. And if you're an athlete, there are sometimes we got to really turn up the past to examine those past performances. Yeah. What can I learn from it? And then when you're in competition, you want to shut down the past and the future, and we're going to jack up the present. And if it all really goes well, we're going to enter into a flow state where we completely lose any sort of conscious awareness of ourselves, because we're so involved in what we're doing in the moment. How's that for an idea?
Yeah, I agree. I think when you start to practice mindfulness and your awareness is sort of growing and improving, you start to see the patterns that your mind makes, and then you can be more intentional about it. I can live in a completely imaginary world. My mind is like ready to go on an adventure at any moment. Hopefully it's a good one, but sometimes it's not so great. So it's knowing when that is helpful and when it's not. And also, when we're creative, sometimes we don't need to be super in the present, right? Like it's to let your mind wander, and you can that's when I come up with like really good ideas, and I sort through how I'm feeling, and I can feel really inspired. But I think it's understanding that there's a little bit of a choice there, that maybe now I have a playlist on Spotify that I named Imagination Playlist. And when I want to let my mind wander, I like put this playlist on, and I'm just like, go for it. Like this, I'm either going to be in the future, I'm going to be in the past, I'm going to be in a completely made up world, whatever it is. Like I'm not present, I'm not mindful right now, but I'm choosing this like time for myself. And then other times, if I'm meditating, that's not super helpful for, for that moment. So I am choosing to try as best I can to bring my attention to the present moment when I'm having a conversation, working, whatever it is. I think it's making that choice, which comes back to the Jon Kabat-Zinn quote that you said earlier. It's that choosing to bring your awareness to the present moment. You don't always have to choose that. Maybe sometimes it is thinking about the future, going over the past, learning from it, growing. Like, we can't live 100% of the time in the present moment. It's definitely not going to happen for me in this lifetime.
Let's talk about meditation a little bit more. So how do you coach athletes with meditation? And then what role does it play for them on a competitive level?
So I usually start with breath work. I think having some type of breath work practice and a meditation practice sets a really strong foundation. So some of the most unhelpful advice that kids get, athletes get, just people in general, is calm down, just relax, let it go.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you think about it, it's like, well, how do I calm down? How do I relax? How do I let it go? And I think breath work and mindfulness or meditation can help with those three things. So I usually start with the breath, because I think if you can start to bring awareness to your breath, it will make meditation a little bit easier to understand, because it's challenging to sort of conceptually get like, what am I actually doing right now? Or when you're changing your breath and controlling your breath, you can be like, oh, I understand what I'm doing, right? I'm breathing deeper. I'm breathing into my belly. I'm holding my breath for like a tiny little moment, whatever it is. You can, especially for athletes, because they want to do what you're telling them. They want to do it, and they want to do it right, and they want to be good at it.
Right.
Which is the like opposite of meditation. You're never going to be there. But with breath work, you can say like, yes, I did inhale for 4 seconds, hold for 4 seconds, exhale for 4 seconds, hold, like I did complete that cycle. So it gives you a little bit more confidence, I think, to move on. And then just your breath can be such a powerful tool in the moment to use. So I start with that. I start with 1 minute a day, because no one has ever said they don't have time for 1 minute.
And what happens in that minute?
Just breathe deeply.
Okay.
Just, if you like to have your hand on your belly, so you can just put your hand on your belly and then direct your breath into your belly. So when you inhale, you feel your hand move away from your spine. When you exhale, your hand moves back. And that's it. You don't have to do anything fancy.
It's nice.
Just breathe into your belly.
Yeah.
So you start to bring awareness that like, oh, I like usually breathe high up in my chest, but it feels nice. I feel more relaxed when I breathe deep into my belly. And then when you practice it consistently, when you're feeling maybe a little bit anxious or nervous, and you say, oh, I'm feeling a little anxious. I feel my breath high up in my chest. I'm going to bring my breath deep into my belly. And then your body's like, oh, I know what happens now. And you start to feel like, oh, I feel a little bit more calm. I feel a little bit more grounded, because you practice consistently. And your body knows, because it's done the work. Your mind knows as well, because you've practiced.
So let's say we've got an athlete or a team of athletes that are in a hyper-competitive moment. It is an anxiety-inducing moment. Oh, we've never made it to the semifinal or the final of whatever that big tournament or event or competition is. What's the practice leading up to that? And then what is the practice the day of, the hour before, the minute before, or during the competition, when we feel this anxiety rising up, especially for those of us who know that either the kids were coaching, or if you're an athlete yourself, you know that anxiety is not helpful to your performance.
Yeah. Well, I would say the foundation would be that you'd started with doing a little bit of breath work. You bumped up the amount of time to maybe 3 minutes. And then once you get to 3 minutes, you add a little bit of a meditation on there too. So you change your breath for the first couple minutes, and then you watch your breath for the rest of the practice. And then you slowly over time build that up to a comfortable habit for you. Mm-hmm. But I always want it to feel sustainable. So it's almost like this is so easy. There's no reason why I can't do this. Right. So that's why I start with a minute.
Yeah.
Because even if you start with 5, then all of a sudden people are like, oh, I ran out of time. I forgot. And it's like, really? Mm-hmm. But a minute, so far, no excuses about this. It's pretty easy to start. So that would be the foundation. And then along the way, we would be talking about like, how do you bring this into training? How do you bring it into competition? And I think individually it matters because people are different and unique, right? So a team, I think it's a little bit more challenging. It's not going to be this is going to work for everybody.
Right.
I think feelings of like anxiousness is at nerves. And then for nerves, which is like my favorite topic because I was such a nervous athlete, it's can you shift your perspective to I'm really excited right now? Because it's basically the same feeling in our body, right? Like I feel butterflies in my stomach, my throat gets really tight, my hands get tingly. But am I going to perceive this as like a really bad thing? Or that is going to get in the way of my performance? Or am I going to perceive this as, oh my God, I'm so excited right now. My body is like ready to go. Out
of a threat mindset into an opportunity mindset.
Yeah. Your body communicates in a way that maybe isn't always. This is how I always try to think of it. And it's been helpful for me. And I try to explain this to athletes too, that it's ready and it's excited and it's good to go, but it doesn't feel good. It's not like communicating in a way that maybe your mind would be like, thank you for that. And now I see we're really ready. So if you can kind of acknowledge those feelings in your body and say like, oh, this is it. Like this is what I worked for. I'm excited. Like my body knows exactly what to do. I'm going to trust my body right now and let it do its thing. And then if you know that you're like a little overactivated and you're a little bit past that point of like nervous excitement and you're to the point of like tunnel vision, I'm going to throw up. I can't, like, I'm going to hyperventilate. Then that's where you can use your breath to like intentionally slow your breathing down to elicit a little bit more of your parasympathetic nervous system, to sort of bring you down a little bit. But you don't want to go like fully relax mode.
Right.
Because you still want to have that like energy and to be ready to go.
You're trying to find the Goldilocks zone.
Yeah.
Not too high, not too low.
Yeah.
Just in the focused performance zone.
Yeah.
Which applies to many things besides athletics. It could apply to an adult giving a big presentation at work or being in the school play.
Yeah.
Or a big test for any kid that goes to school.
Yeah. I use it in the context of sports, but it's like you could take this and use it in any domain that you're in. It's the same concept. It's just how you articulate it, like the words you use. I'm not very good with like business vocabulary, but it is the same. It's the same thing. It's like, how do you perform under pressure? You know, how do you prepare? How do you perceive your mistakes? How do you learn from your mistakes?
Well, even the SAT, I mean, this was 10 years ago, but at Test Prep Gurus, we discovered that physiologically, the threat mindset is the same as the opportunity mindset. So being anxious and nervous about something physiologically looks the exact same as being excited about it. And when you change that anxiety into excitement, which is far easier than going from anxiety to calm.
Yes.
It's all, in fact, when anxiety gets too high, it's nearly impossible to move to the calm area of the chart. If it's mapped out, anxiety is right next to excitement, because it's all those same physiological markers with you mentioned them, sweaty palms and butterflies in the stomach. And a lot of athletes, professional athletes, I should say, know that that's a hack. That you've got they find different reframing tricks to move from nervous to excited.
Yeah.
What are some reframing tricks you found to help make that jump?
I don't think there's any tricks or hacks. I think it's really just changing your perspective. And I think it takes a little bit of time. You can hear something. It's with like mindfulness, mental skills in general. You can hear something 100 times and be like, yeah, I know. And then that 101 time, you're like, oh, I get it now.
Right.
And I think that was it for me. I mean, I was so nervous all the time. I perceived it as a really bad thing. So I would like start to feel nervous and I'm like, I don't like this. I wanted to run away and hide. That was like, I wanted to run, I wanted to hide. And I just was like, this is really bad. I should not be feeling this way. I should be feeling calm and confident. And it actually was years later after I was finished swimming, I was taking, I retired from swimming and I got into sports modeling because of swimming to try to make money for traveling. And so I kind of kept that going. And then from sports modeling, I got into commercial acting. And when I first did that, I told my agent, I won't do anything where I have to talk because I got so nervous and I already have a high voice and I'd go into these auditions. And then I just like I was a deer in headlights. So you'd be like, say your name. And I'd be like, Micha. And then I would like freak out and I'd be like, I'm never doing that again. And then finally I was like, if I'm going to do this, why don't I just like put a little effort into it? So I took some commercial acting classes and I took this class in LA and the guy was terrifying. He just would like yell at you all the time. And I think he was trying to elicit that like mean casting director vibe, or he was really that way. I don't know. But yeah, I was terrified of him the entire time. And it was like, when it was your turn, he just like was so mean to you. And I knew it was like, I was like, don't take this seriously because it's fine. It's not personal. But he was like yelling at us and he was like, all of you want to be here because this is your dream to be an actor. And I was like, oh shoot, this is not my dream to be an actor. But he was like, next time you go into an audition and you're feeling nervous, just say, I'm fucking excited right now. Sorry, can I say that?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
we even got a California state assemblyman to say fuck on the air, which was really exciting. He was like, oh, we can curse?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so fire away.
Okay, cool. Well, I'll try to make that my only one. But it was like someone like threw a bucket of ice cold water on me. For some reason, that was the moment for me, that acting coach in LA, outside of my swimming career, that it was like, it is the same thing. Like I feel the same. And in fact, every time I've raced well, I felt really nervous. Like it's part of the process. Mm-hmm. And once I kind of made that shift, I was able to look at it. I still get really nervous and I still don't like it. It still doesn't feel good. But rather than going through this like spiral of this is bad, I shouldn't feel this way. I'm like, okay, here I am. I'm nervous and my hands are sweaty, butterflies in my stomach, and it's harder to talk or something, but I'm not scared about it anymore. And I'm like, this means I care. I'm never nervous if I don't care about something. I'm also not nervous if I haven't put in the work and tried.
Right.
So it's an indicator of being ready.
Yep.
So I don't think there's a hack to it. I think for people, you have to like work through it.
Yeah, you're going through a practice in order to improve these mental skills.
Yes.
Which will help you to develop some awareness that has a little distance from what's happening.
Yes.
And then you can just look at it. And it's not that you suddenly feel better and everything's fine. And, oh man, I'm in my optimal state. And I'm going to go kick ass out in the competition. You can just step back and say, oh, these are some of the things that happen and they might feel a little bit uncomfortable and not good, but this is part of the process of getting ready. And I am ready. And it allows you to focus on that optimal performance rather than optimal feelings.
Yeah.
Because they are different, right? A little bit of being uncomfortable and some negative feelings might be part of your process towards optimal performance. And as long as it's not too extreme, there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, if it's helpful, I think that's always like, is it helpful or is it not helpful?
Mm-hmm.
If you can look at your past performances, and when I said like you have to work through it, not in a way of like just accept that you're nervous and it's going to get in your way and be like, you can practice certain things to feel more confident in your ability to experience those nervous feelings and have it not be something that's going to get in your way.
Mm-hmm.
So whether that's, and how can you build awareness around that? You can journal about your experience. Maybe you'll see the same pattern that I did, that, well, actually, like when I perform really well, I feel nervous. How can I shift my perspective on this? Like write that down. What comes up for you?
Yeah.
Like maybe you know better than anyone else what you need. So it's like tapping into your intuition on that.
Well, I know from personal experience, I have to do a lot of public speaking. And I remember this was a few years ago, but there came a point where I no longer felt nervous about it. It was like, well, I've done a version of this talk more than 100 times. I've got it down cold. I'm ready to go. And afterwards, I remember, and which I thought was such a great moment of progress for myself, the first time that ever happened. And I remember afterwards going like, I was a little flat. I kind of sucked. And it took a couple more of not being nervous and just going, it's not like it was bad, but it wasn't my best.
Yeah.
And I suddenly realized I need to be a little nervous to be at my best, to deliver the best I'm able to deliver. And so again, I think it's finding that Goldilocks zone. But I know for me, being a little bit nervous is a good thing.
Yeah.
And if it's something that means something to you and you're working towards a goal you want to achieve, then I say lean into what leads you to that optimal performance.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's that awareness piece, right? And then it's the acceptance piece, or like the perspective shift. Because I think with nerves, that's a big one. It's not even that you have to change the way you're feeling. It's change the way you're perceiving that moment.
Yes.
And that gives you so much power and the feeling of control more, because then it goes from something that feels really bad and out of your control to something that's like part of your process that's helping you perform at your best.
And that shift that you just discussed probably helps minimize some of the ancillary negatives that can come with nervousness that's out of your control, right? Like when you were talking about your athletic experiences, it sounds like it had some negative spillover in other areas of your life where outside of athletics, you weren't able to give yourself credit for these massive achievements. And that shift in awareness makes you more able to do that. Like, oh, that was kind of an awesome thing I did there. I could feel good about that.
Yeah.
Being one of the best swimmers in the United States at this moment. I mean, it's so funny because even when you mention the modeling thing, I'm just thinking, gosh, from the outside, like that's a really interesting thing for you to say that, right? Because you go, okay, super successful athletic career, move into sports modeling. It sounds like almost accidentally, it just falls into your lap and it's just happening. And that you have success in both of those areas. For someone else looking on the outside and going like, and you're nervous when you're up there to say your name into the camera. But I think it's great that you're being vulnerable and revealing that, because lots of people feel that way. I mean, I guess all of us feel that way, no matter whatever the accomplishments are in the past or lack of accomplishments, we can all get stuck in that.
Yeah. I think that's something that has been a reoccurring theme for me throughout my entire journey into like working with athletes, is so many of the things that I thought were unique and like, oh, I'm just like, I'm freaking out over here by myself. Now I'm like, no, everybody's freaking out. Mm-hmm. And it's normal to feel like you don't belong. It's normal to be nervous. It's normal to get distracted and make easy mistakes in a company. It's like these things happen, and you're not alone. Like a couple years ago, I heard a podcast with this person that I used to swim with, who was a world record holder. So she was the fastest person in the world at the time. And she was talking about her Olympic experience and how she felt like she didn't belong. And I was like, if you don't belong, then who does? You literally were the best person by a mile. Like,
yeah.
And that just opened my perspective to it is if she could feel that way and be so successful, like it's such a normal human experience. I'm not saying everybody feels that way, but if you do feel that way, like I just had that reoccurring sort of statement in my mind, like everybody's better than me. I don't belong here. And I listen to athletes tell me that all the time. And I'm like, but you are there.
Right.
Like I went to Cal, I got a scholarship, but somehow, so if I didn't belong, like what about the other people that went there? You know, like we all deserved a spot there. But I didn't have the sort of awareness or perspective to give myself credit for that. But I think that now I can look back on it and be like, nothing's wrong with me that I felt that way. It's just a very normal human experience.
Absolutely. And the Dunning-Kruger effect, I'm a big fan and believer of this. These psychologists found this, that there's a disproportionate number of people at both ends of the bell curve when it comes to almost any type of performance, but they originally uncovered it with IQ. So there's a disproportionate number of people with really high IQs that they can't see themselves as being intelligent, and they might win a Nobel Prize and think they didn't deserve it. And if they won one, well, then it probably must not be that hard to get one. Yeah. And at the other end, the exact same effect happens, except it's in reverse, where the IQ is not there. And yet they can't understand why the world isn't handing them everything on a platter, because they are smarter than everyone else on Earth. Yeah. And it happened. They found the same effect and again, it's not everybody, but a disproportionate number of athletes, really low performers and really high performers. They're seeing each other on the other end of the scale. Yeah. And it's a fascinating warping of your self-perception versus reality.
Yeah, because what does that mean? The people, like that's a trait within high performers to think that you don't belong and you suck.
Amongst some.
Some, yeah.
Yes. I'm blanking on the guy's name of the podcast. Tom Bilyeu, this guy. Tom Bilyeu had someone on who had written a book on high performers, and he said nearly all of them have this push-pull effect where something is always pulling them forward in life, and then something's always chasing them. And so he said it's this rare combination where the thing that's pulling them forward is seeing greatness in themselves when there's not really any reason for somebody from the outside to see it. But they have this inkling of that. And so they're going to keep moving towards that and working towards it. Kind of like making the crazy decision to be like, I'm a 100-meter swimmer, so I'm going to switch to ocean swimming and I could probably make the Olympics. Like that would be a crazy thing. He's like, but the key is that it's also combined with being chased by this anxiety that you're not good enough.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Okay. That resonates. Yeah. I can see that. I've always thought that is one of my strengths is to like imagine what if it works out. I think a lot of time, like I still have the visions of like, what if I fail? Mm-hmm. But the image I had, the dream I had of being an Olympian was so vivid to me. And I thought about it every single day. So it's like it's not an either or. Like, yes, I'm really positive, or no, I'm really negative. You can be a big dreamer and see your potential. And you can also have these negative thoughts that cannot be so helpful and kind. But then when you start to do the work on the mental side, you can start to see those two sort of sides of yourself. And you can choose, like, it's actually more helpful when I am thinking these inspiring thoughts and I'm moving in that direction. And when I'm having these negative thoughts, it's not really helpful. And rather than trying to just being able to see it for what it is, rather than, I think in more traditional, like old school sports psychology is like, oh, if you have a negative thought, stop. It was a thought stoppage. Mm-hmm. So like you have the negative thought, you stop it, mm-hmm. and then you replace it with a positive one. It's really hard to do that. And you kind of setting yourself up for failure because your mind is just coming up with, I mean, I have the craziest thoughts that just like pop into my head and I'm like, where does that come from? You know? So if you are trying to stop all of those and replace them, it's really easy to feel like a failure. But when you practice from more of like a mindfulness perspective of like, oh, I have these thoughts popping up all over the time, all over the place. And some of them are helpful and inspiring and some of them are not. So I'm just going to see those unhelpful thoughts and then I'm going to choose to focus on the positive ones or the neutral ones, because that's a great place to settle your mind too. If you're having a hard time jumping to the positive, is hang out in neutral territory.
I love this meditation exercise that a teacher told it to him when he was like a little kid. And it was a sleeping meditation, which was that your brain is always just generating thoughts and ideas. The mind is always pumping out stuff. And sometimes we can't sleep because the mind is just firing and we can't ignore it. And trying to stop it is an exercise in futility because that's what the mind does. It just pops out thoughts. And she said, I want you to visualize each thought is a little paper sailboat and there's a river going by and you're just going to take that thought, put it on the river, and it's going to sail on down the way. And we just keep taking them and keep doing that. And you'll just fall asleep doing that. And it really helped him to fall asleep, apparently. But I think it's a wonderful meditation of any kind, whether you're trying to fall asleep or not. For me, it gives me that distance from my thoughts. I am not my mind, which is just this thought machine. And I think that's helpful for performance, for athletics, any type of performance situation.
Yeah. I love that. I actually do that meditation and lead that with my athletes a lot too. For that reason is because it's like you can create this really vivid picture in your mind of like beautiful mountain, river, you know, you're sitting on a rock and it's like using all your senses. And then it's like, oh, you have a thought and you just watch it float by on that little leaf.
Yeah.
And it's that creating that distance that like you are not your thoughts. You don't have to believe everything that you think, which is powerful.
Thank goodness. Because I have a lot of terrible thoughts.
Yeah, me too.
Just not that they're bad. They're just not useful in any way.
Yeah. Sometimes they are bad or mean.
Let's let them go.
Yeah. I mean, would you ever talk to someone the way that you talk to yourself?
I don't have a problem with the negative self-talk. Okay. I just, when I meditate though and notice things coming up, I'm like, man, I have a lot of just dumb thoughts. Yeah. Like that is just, that's not one to pay attention to.
Yeah.
It's almost like giving up a little bit of agency because you got to step back and go, yeah, that thing's always running and you're actually not in control of it.
Yeah.
The only thing you're in control of is what you are going to pay attention to, where your awareness is going to be directed. And if 90% of your thoughts are not useful, that's fine. Just pay attention to the 10% that are and deal with those. Those are the ones that will lead you towards your long-term goals and good things will happen from there.
The stories we tell ourselves are really important. And sometimes we tell ourselves very unhelpful stories. If you can acknowledge those stories and see them, then you can kind of distance yourself from them and be like, all right, I read in some book, which I haven't used a lot, but I like the imagery. She talked about like creating a name for your inner voice, like your mean voice. And for some reason, I named mine Rhonda. Okay. And I don't do it all the time, but sometimes I'm like, okay, Rhonda. But it's not helpful. And it just gives you that little bit of distance. And for me, it makes me laugh because I don't know why, it just sounds kind of funny. I'm like, oh, Rhonda, you're being so mean right now. And it's not me. It's not like a personal attack, like, oh, I'm being mean. This is like a hit on me as a person. It's just like, no, I have these like random thoughts that are just ridiculous.
Yeah. There goes Frank again.
Yeah.
Trying to knock me down. Yeah. Not going to let him do it. I think I just named mine Frank.
Yeah. I like it. The Frank's a good one too.
Yeah. Hey, why not? Yeah.
Just got to go with it.
Yeah. Frank makes me laugh a little bit too, which is good in those moments.
Yeah.
Right. If you have a moment of doubt, it's good to just be able to laugh.
Yeah.
I mean, I think of PKs in soccer, right? At the end of a soccer match, because I was a soccer athlete, like it's one of the most intense pressure-filled moments in sports when you got to step up there by yourself and it's one strike of the ball and it's all riding on this. It's kind of an arbitrary way to decide a match, but that's how it's done. And anything that can make it like bring you back to, hey, we're just playing a game. We're just having fun here. I know how to do this. For me, at least, it was helpful to gamify that situation a little bit. And I like the idea of giving it the negative voice a funny name. Because if you can be like, oh, Frank, it's not time for you right now.
Yeah. Takes a little of the edge off. Yeah. And for some people, I think that's the thing. It's like for you, it was gamifying, right? So it's like finding what it is to take the pressure off. Like for me, I use the Rhonda like super randomly. It's not really a practice, but for some people, it might be a really helpful practice that they do all the time. That that voice, they've named it, even maybe created like an image of what that person looks like, and they're like, "Not today," you know? Right? And they practice it consistently. So I think it's really figuring out what works for you, and that's the hard part. I think is that people want like a fix. You know, they were like, tell me what to do.
Right.
Like how to fix this right now. And I'm like, well, you got to put in the work consistently and it takes a while. And you're on a constant journey of discovery because there's not like a destination.
Well, just like with any sport, if you're a basketball player, it's not like Phil Jackson, or John Wooden, whoever you want to fill in there for your greatest ever basketball coach.
Yeah, I like Phil Jackson.
Could come in and one day be like, okay, let's examine you. You need to do A, B, and C, and then you will be the greatest player you can be.
Yeah.
And the end, right? Like the only way Phil Jackson can help you become the optimal player is to coach you.
Yeah.
And the process doesn't ever end, right? They're always growing, changing, discovering new things about yourself, about the game. And it's a practice, not a decision or something that you can be told. I mean, that's what I'm getting from you
Absolutely.
today.
I mean, I always say like you're training your brain just like you're training your body. You don't go to practice for 15 minutes once a month and expect to be the best athlete. You show up every day and you do the work. So why would you think that doing one meditation in January is going to hold you through the year or that you did 5 years ago? It's like you have to do the work every day. And it doesn't have to be the same amount. You find ways to incorporate it into your training, but you have to be intentional. And it's just like anything. You have to be consistent to build that strength.
Yeah.
And people get that with their body. They're like, well, yeah, absolutely.
And if you stop for 6 months, you get out of shape.
Yeah. And you got to kind of build it back up again.
Yeah.
Yeah. I find that that's the frustrating thing. I don't work with young athletes. I just don't have the capacity for it. But I know it's like such an important time that in a person's life where they could build those skills. I really struggle with the parent aspect of the parents' expectations, wanting someone to come in and like fix their kid and like have a Band-Aid or something that's just going to make their kid resilient and the best athlete possible when maybe the kid doesn't even care and doesn't want to do it. Because you have to want it. Like the coach can buy into it. And with the team, I think if the coach buys into it, the team's going to buy into it. But for athletes in general, they have to make the decision. This is something I value, and this is something I want to work towards, because there's nothing I can do to help you if you don't want to do it yourself, if you don't want to do the work.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that is a very tough situation for all coaches of younger athletes when the parent wants it more than the kid does.
Kids have a hard go of it now. I think there's so much pressure from such a young age to be an elite athlete, and it's taking away the joy of learning to use your body and play and have fun and grow. And there's so much value in sports beyond getting a scholarship in college or being a pro athlete.
Well,
there's value in those things too. And obviously I love them, but it's not for everybody. And that's okay.
And it seems that there's a lot of research going on. I mean, whether we see it in that book, The Anxious Generation, or Never Enough is another really good one, where it's pervasive throughout childhood now to be moving towards greatness on one level or another. We've got to, in school, do everything in terms of activities and grades and what you do with your free time. Everything's got to be oriented towards getting into a top 25 college. And if you're going to be in athletics, well, then we better be moving towards being a professional.
Yeah.
And if you're going to get into music, who wants to be someone who can just play the piano? Like, you better be moving towards being a professional musician. When in fact, there is all kinds of value in being someone who can play the piano or just play the guitar. And you don't have to go be a professional. And being able to enjoy physical activity with your body for your whole life, that's a gift. And I hate the idea that kids miss out on that because they're not good enough to be moving towards the college scholarship track. Well, that's by definition what, 1%, less than 1% of athletes. So what are we doing for the other 99.8%?
I know.
We're doing a disservice to them. And how do we fix that?
I think parents, we have to accept responsibility for the culture we created. The Little League World Series has been around since 1947.
Okay.
And only 64 of those athletes have gone on to be Major League Baseball players.
That's interesting.
They have this like moment where everybody's like, you're this amazing athlete and, you know, a celebrity. And it's just like this huge moment. They're so young. They haven't even gone through puberty yet.
Right.
And I think it's just like you're setting them up for, like, what are you setting them up for? Because they're most likely going to go through puberty and their body's going to change. They're going to get into high school. And it's hard to get through high school as an athlete because you start getting more independence. Your friends are going and doing fun things and you have to go to bed early because you have Saturday morning practice. It's not easy to get through those stages. And it's really hard to go from high school to college and to swim or to be an athlete all 4 years of college. So to set kids up for success, I feel like we have to shift our perspective on why are they doing sports at a young age? It's not to be a professional athlete. It's to gain body awareness. It's to learn teamwork. It's to learn how to fail over and over and over again and get back up. There's so much value to sports that's not winning.
And there has to be some joy in it at a young age if you're going to stick with it. Like, it can't feel like a job.
Yeah. No, which I think it is now. Like kids, they're like 10 and they're doing like 2-hour practices
5 days a week,
a day of one sport. Mm-hmm. They're not exploring different sports anymore. Yeah. And that's actually a wonderful way to help your kids be resilient is to foster their love of their sport. Because when things get tough, if you love what you do, you'll find a way. But if you're forced into a sport because your parents are telling you you're going to be the next Tiger Woods or, Simone Biles or whoever it is, and you don't want to be, like, it's going to be harder to get up after you fail because it's not something you really want to do.
The Sports Gene is up here somewhere.
I see it.
Yeah. Great book. And they talk about, there's a chapter in there on youth sports. And to your point about the Little League World Series. So a vast majority of players in the major leagues have 20/10 vision. What I can see at 10 feet, one of these guys can see at 20 feet.
Okay.
The reason behind that is because at a certain point, the pitchers are throwing the ball so fast that you have to have exceptional eyesight to be able to read the seams on the ball to, in fractions of a second, decipher how that ball is moving and where it's going to end up in fractions of a second so that you can hit it.
Yeah.
And there is no way, if you have 20/20 eyesight, which is great. We would all love to have 20/20 eyesight, but you have to have better than that, which is extremely rare.
Yeah.
And if you don't have it, there's no way to train it and develop it. You just don't have it. And it doesn't mean you can't ever be a Major League Baseball player.
Yeah.
It's just extremely unlikely.
Wow, I've never heard of that before. That is interesting though, because I don't know that much about it. Like there's nothing you can do. Like when you were first talking, I'm like, is that something from playing when you were younger that you developed this ability to like see, that's something you're practicing all the time. So are you better at it because you've been practicing? Or is it just a gift that you have?
My understanding of it from the book was that you could move the needle tiny, tiny bits, a couple percentage points. But the difference between somebody who's 2020, 2010, or 25, some of these guys, right? So I can only see it at 5 feet away and they can see it at 20, which is really exceptional eyesight. You can't move the needle like that.
Yeah.
Or in the NBA, another example was it's not just being tall. It's this particular ratio with your limbs. So he described it as the opposite of the Vitruvian man, right? Where he's got his arms and legs out and there's the circle and it's all perfectly symmetrical. So if we were looking at NBA players, their arms would extend way out of that circle and so would their legs. So it's not just tall, it's having disproportionately long legs and long arms is the key physical factor to have. And so again, these things are out of your control. And point being in the book was there better be some joy in it, especially as a kid, because so many of these major things that lead to either winning a scholarship to play in college or the tiny fraction of those scholarship winning athletes to go be a professional, they're out of your control. They weren't actually things you could develop. Granted, there's all kinds of hard work involved and nobody's going to downplay that.
But I just want to point out something.
Okay.
Right? That's the majority. It's not all of them. So within every sport or every profession, there's people that do not fit the mold.
Sure.
That make it despite that.
Right.
And I like to focus on that because I think we all have so much potential. And when you hear something like that and you're like, oh, well, I love basketball, but I'm not going to play it anymore because my arms are short.
Right.
I'm not tall. It's like, well, I'm not saying that obviously sometimes those things are deciding factors, but there are outliers.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
So you're saying I've got a chance?
Yeah, that's what I was saying. I think you have to.
What is it, Dumb and Dumber? When he says so what are my chances here? Like 1 in 10? She's like, we're like 1 in a million.
Yeah.
So you're saying I've got a chance. Yeah. I'm not saying you can't make it if you don't have those things to whatever. And you never want to put a limit on anybody prematurely, of course. But maybe the goal, just like where we started this conversation, if the goal is I'm going to get involved in youth sports so I can go be a professional. And if I don't hit professional, I have failed.
Yeah.
Which is the message sometimes parents are inadvertently sending, even if they don't know they're sending it, or coaches are inadvertently sending it without really thinking it through. We could define success differently.
Yeah.
And if you happen to have the right factors and the right work ethic and all of it comes together at the right moment, and you don't get unlucky, like in your example, which happens, you could be good enough to go be a professional player and you don't get the right look from the right scout on the right day.
Yeah.
There's so many things that have to come together. So maybe it would be healthier to define success in terms of preparation, doing the right things, adding a mindfulness practice to your athletics in order to, what was your control the controllables?
Yeah.
Yeah. Focus on controlling the controllables.
Yeah.
And define success that way. Because that's something you can build on no matter what the end outcomes are.
Yeah. I think also when you're talking about parents, now that I am on the path that I'm on and I've read the research and I know this to be true, but it's interesting because it backed up just to my own experiences when after I was swimming and people would hear about that I swam professionally and they'd be like, oh, my daughter's 9 and she's like the best right now. And what's your advice? I always gave them the same answer and no parent ever liked it.
Yeah.
And I would say, My mom she supported me. She didn't really know what was going on. Like, she didn't know my best times. She didn't show up to every swim meet. She was always just proud and happy for me. And I did it because I wanted to. I kept going because I wanted to and I chose to. And that never is the advice that I think they want. It's like, my mom pushed me. I don't know what the advice they want, but I just can tell as soon as I start saying it, their eyes kind of like glare. They're like, oh, and I'm done. Like, new conversation. There is a lot of evidence to that. So when you are happy and you choose to do something and you choose to do it on your own terms and you're intrinsically motivated, like, you're going to perform better. And so how can we as parents help our kids do that? I think would be really helpful.
Well, sure. And
we have to check ourselves too on what are, like, why do we want our kid to be a professional athlete? Why do we want them to go to college and be an athlete? Maybe it's because financially you need them to get a scholarship, and that's understandable. But it's also putting a lot of pressure on them, since it's like, it really is like 1%, or I don't know the number. I know you can look on the NCAA website and it tells you the percentage per sport of getting in.
You know what? We're going to pull it up just to have exact numbers here.
It is really slim.
And you need to ask yourself, is it worth your child possibly resenting you through all of their adult life if you're pushing them towards a goal that they're not really choosing?
Yeah.
If they choose it, win or lose, however it shakes out, if it was something you decided to do for yourself, you're going to be okay with that.
Yeah. Yeah. If you decide for yourself. Yeah. But if you feel like your parents' love is tied to your success, it can be a really heartbreaking experience to not live up to the expectations that have been set for you.
Mm-hmm.
Someone just said recently, and I really liked it, is that, when you are a parent of an athlete, to remember that they only have 2 parents, but they're going to have a lot of coaches. So let the coaches do the coaching and just be the parent.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the best thing you can say to your kid is like, I loved watching you play. I loved watching you perform or dance or whatever it is. Just like, let the coach be the coach.
Yeah.
Just don't coach them in the car on the way. That's like one of the top reasons kids don't want to do sports, is because the drive home.
Well, and I'm gonna look at that percentage, but you just made me think of, there next door to me is a gentleman, Eric Berg, who's coached water polo. I think he had 30, 40 years of, maybe not 40, but 30 years, 25 plus years of coaching. Excellent coach, super successful program. His youngest son walked on at UCLA for water polo and became a star, and they won a national championship. And I asked him the other day, because he had given me a piece of advice when my son was really little, and he was invited to go play in this. I mean, he was like 7 years old, 6 years old, and invited to play in this soccer tournament down in San Diego. And it was like a big deal. And it came up in conversation, and he said, "Why are you doing that?" I was a little bit taken aback by it, because I thought if anybody was going to be pumped, it'd be him.
Yeah.
And it had just come up because we were like getting in the car. And I said, I don't know. The opportunity came. He wants to do it. That's why we're doing it. And he immediately was just like, just be careful. Be careful. You want him to love this. Your job is to keep an eye on the long term.
Yeah.
And it was like, it was so on his radar, whereas I wasn't thinking anything about it. But that was a really good piece of advice. So recently I asked him, I said, what other coaching gyms do you have? Because that
was a good one.
Yeah. I was like, that was several years ago. And what else have you got? And he said, well, I would tell the parents at the beginning of every season, you're in charge of the first 60 seconds after the competitive event. And you should think about it beforehand. What do you want that 60 seconds to be like? Do you want it to be a situation where you're going to be reprimanding your kid for things they could have done and didn't do, and turning this into this really negative experience between parent and child? Or do you want it to be a moment where you tell them, hey, it's just a joy to watch you play? Or do you want it to just be a quiet moment where you just let them decompress with you there and you don't even need to say anything? He's like, my only advice to all of you parents is don't let the heat of the moment decide how you're going to treat that. Think about it right now before we're going to have any games. What do you want it to be? That's going to help you execute that when you actually get there.
Oh, I like that. That's really good. Because even little kids know when they make a mistake. I mean, they know when they messed up. Yeah. They don't need to be told from their coach and then come back to their parent and be told again over and over again. Like they're learning that on their own. Yeah. Sure.
All right, let's look up that stat. What are the chances of me winning a scholarship? The percentage of high school athletes who receive a full or partial athletic scholarship is 1.3% overall. And then it's broken down sport by sport. Some of them are lower than 1%. Some are a little bit higher, but your average is about 1.3% of all the high school athletes. And that is a full or partial scholarship, because not everybody realizes there are a lot of little partial scholarships that go around.
You can just get books paid for. That's a scholarship.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
That does put it in perspective, though. I mean, you're 1%. Or when people went there, I mean, there's 800 players in Major League Baseball total.
Right.
I mean, that's not very many.
Right.
You think your kid has a way better chance of getting into law school, med school, I mean, whatever other hard things there are out there.
Sure. Well, Scott Galloway, who I really like, author and podcaster, and he talks about how you're
what's the book?
Let's see. The Algebra of Happiness is the latest one.
Okay.
But he's got several: the Algebra of Wealth, the Algebra of fill in the blank. They're all really great books. But he said he has a breakdown on if you're in the top 10% of high school athletes, you probably won't make the bench in college. He said, but you're in the top 10% of kids that want to study accounting. You will make a ton of money when you get out of college.
Yeah.
And he was just talking about the point of there's so many things out there you can go and do. Yeah. And some of those things that aren't considered sexy in one version or another. I'm going to be a pro athlete. I'm going to be a pro musician. I'm going to be a fashion designer. He said it's okay to pursue those if you have objective feedback that you're really good at those things. So, but there are a lot of easy wins at the same time. Do you want to be a top level student who then goes to work in the movies, and you might be a PA making kind of minimum wage for most of your career, or you could go be a above average bankruptcy attorney and you get to fly first class for the rest of your life and take amazing trips and not ever worry about money.
Yeah.
And I just thought it was an interesting perspective. It doesn't mean we need to not follow things that we're passionate about in competitive industries, but a nice thought to just throw into the mix, just to keep all of our options open.
Yeah. Well, there are, I mean, I think it's good to the doing it for money part. I feel a little resistance to, because I'm like, well, maybe money is not your main motivator, right? So I'm sure I could make a lot of money if I picked any other profession.
You'd probably be killing it as a nurse right now.
Yeah. But I've never been motivated by that. And I think the thrill of trying something really hard and maybe failing is really exciting. Like, not very many people have done it. What if you're the one that makes it, you know? That's why sports are so fun to watch, because it's like the whole human experience out there. We were watching the Dodgers last night, and I mean, they're the best. I'm not going to say the world, because it's not the world. I know it's but they're messing up and you're seeing them in real time make silly mistakes that you think like, why'd you do that?
Yeah.
Shouldn't that be easy for you? But they're also at the World Series and there's no greater pressure and they're human and they make these mistakes. And then you get to see them, go through the emotions, all the emotions, and then the excitement of winning. It's just all of it. It's just so captivating.
Well, and to your point, I think there is also huge value in striving to do something that's insanely competitive. And yeah, the odds are against you. If it's something that you intrinsically really want to do.
Yes, that's the key.
And win or lose, you will gain from that as a person. You would not be the human being you are if you hadn't pursued that Olympic dream.
Yeah.
And the fact that you didn't compete in the Olympics, me standing from the outside is like, well, so what? You achieved insane things on your own. And you've got a lot of amazing knowledge to share because of that experience. And as many brilliant people have said before, we often learn more from our failures than we do from our successes.
Absolutely. Yeah. I agree with that wholeheartedly. And I think I was just having a conversation with an athlete the other day, and he was talking, he's like, why am I on this journey? I'm not making any money. He has this like dream that he's chasing. And he was like, when I graduated from school, I had all these like opportunities. Like I could have been making so much money right now. People like really thought I was special at, whatever he majored in. And he was like, now I'm just grinding every day for this goal, but he's still doing it because there's that drive that like, it's that excitement of chasing the unknown.
This is what I said to you about podcasting?
No. Did I say that?
No, I'm kidding. Just when you said that, I was like, yeah, we're doing this insane thing and grinding every day. And even when good things are happening, it's like you're working hard at it to make, because you have this drive to go do this thing. But I didn't mean to disrupt your story.
No, it's okay,
keep going.
But probably because you're a high achiever too, is that those successes come in and you're like, that's really exciting. But on to the next, like I still got to figure this problem out. And it's like, there's so much to take in besides just acknowledging the success along the way. Yeah.
Well, for me, it's like we're throwing, just like we've been talking about, throw the quote unquote success out the window. I'm really enjoying this present moment experience. Having these conversations is worth it all by itself. And there have been a number of those now where it's like, well, I don't really care if this thing makes me famous or not. I learned and grew as a person because of that conversation. And I wouldn't have had it if there wasn't an excuse to sit down and do it. And that's worth it all by itself. And if other people end up coming along for the ride and finding meaning in it too, well, then that's all just gravy and goodness, but I can't control any of that.
Yeah.
So, hey, let's be mindful and enjoy this present moment.
Yeah. It's easy right now.
Yeah. All right. We've hit meditation, breath work, mindfulness. These are all things that will help us to perform better in these competitive situations. Are there any that we haven't gotten to? I
think it comes down to what you gravitate towards and what you can make sustainable. So journaling, for one, can be a really helpful practice. To be honest, I really find resistance with journaling, even though I have found it very helpful. And it's a struggle for me still, is just sitting down and like writing it out. I feel more comfortable thinking about it, but it's not the same thing.
Right.
Getting your words down on paper, writing it instead of typing it. There's so much value there, and that can help build awareness. And I think sometimes when you ask yourself a question and then you just start free writing it, you come up with a really interesting answers when you let sort of your subconscious mind just like go for it and spill it out. And you can have a lot of important insights that way. So you can
surprise yourself.
Yeah. But I said it's not like I find resistance with it. I still do it. Like sometimes I'm not as consistent. But I think if you find resistance with one thing and you think, or you try meditation one time or breath work one time and you're like, oh, I don't like this. It's not for me. Try something else, journaling, mental imagery, but maybe come back to, sometimes I think of planting seeds, like maybe meditation isn't right for you right now. Maybe you're really resistant to, I can't turn my mind off and that's what I need to do. Maybe you stick with breath work for a little while and then build up to it. You really got to go on the journey.
Yeah.
And figure out what works for you. Like, what is the issue? Not the issue, but like, what's getting in your way of showing up on a daily basis to be the best version of you possible? You really have to be brave to go on that journey because you're going to have to acknowledge parts of yourself that maybe are uncomfortable and you don't want to deal with. I feel like with meditation, you could call it insight meditation, and you have like insights as your awareness grows. And every time I've sort of go through this phase where I've had an insight about myself and I don't like it and I don't want to go through the process. I'm like, I could just stay here and I could be comfortable and ignore this for a little while longer. But I know that the only way to move past it is to go through it and like sit with that uncomfortable feeling or reflect on that part of myself that I'm meeting with resistance. And then once you kind of experience that for a little bit and go through it, then you can lessen that resistance and hold and find yourself on the other side.
What's an example of that?
This will not shock you, but when I started to teach, so I went from swimming, I retired and got pregnant immediately. And then I was like, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I was like, oh, I got my Pilates certification. I got 2 yoga certifications. And then I was running in my treadmill in the garage, staring at the wall. And I thought, I don't really want to teach yoga or Pilates. I just love being an athlete. I love thinking about the mindset. And like, I started meditating at that point. And I was like, what if I work with athletes and teach them mindfulness and mental skills? And, so I went out, I didn't really know how to start. Like, I was like, I don't know how to do this. So I'm just going to like start. I reached out to a couple coaches and I was like, can I come talk to your team about my experience in mindfulness? And I had the coach, who's my friend, he swam at Cal too. He's like, yeah, come on up. I went up and talked to his team. And I had never done public speaking before. I had a lot I wanted to share. And it was just like an hour of me spewing everything I wanted to tell them about mindfulness. Like I like told them my whole life story. I went into like all these different aspects of mindfulness, like just, they probably were like brain dead by the time I was done. And I was really nervous. And by the time I drove home, I had convinced myself that I would never public speak again because I was so embarrassing and I did such a poor job. Around that same time, I also ran my first marathon, like within the first couple of weeks. And I told Logan, I go, I just want to run this race for fun, not be competitive. I just want to like run a marathon. And I ran the marathon. It did not go well. My hip started really hurting and I started like limping at like 18 miles and I like cried for the last 6 miles and then continued to completely beat myself up over my marathon experience and that it was so embarrassing and that I should have been better and like all that blah, blah, blah. And Logan was like, didn't you just want to run a marathon for fun? And I was like, yeah. He was like, well, then what's the problem? Like, why are you doing this to yourself? And I was like, what do you mean? He's like, why are you being so hard on yourself? And I was like, oh, it was like a light bulb moment, like, oh, I don't have to be so hard on myself. And then I realized like, oh, I've been really like, I do this all the time. This like cycle of me doing something scary for me or new or, setting this goal for myself, achieving it, or maybe like slightly underperforming of where I think I should be, which is always like way too high, and then completely annihilating myself for attempting it. And then I'd go and do the same, then like a week later, I'm doing something else and then beating myself up over it again. And that was a huge insight for me. I was like, oh, I'm really mean to myself. And it felt really uncomfortable. Like I had to look back on my whole athletic experience and think, oh, I didn't have to do that. Like that's not the way, like the only way that you can do that.
Right.
What would it have been like if I would have been nice to myself? What would it have been like if I showed up for the day of a marathon and just thought like, hey, I have 2 little kids. I did the best I could in training. I never did speed work. So I should not have a goal time, but I did because I'm competitive. Like what would it have been like if I just ran and looked around LA, and like the LA Marathon's an awesome marathon because you run through LA and it's all closed down. So it's just like a really cool perspective. Everybody's cheering for you. It's a really cool experience. Like I was just in my head beating myself up the whole time. I didn't even realize it was a cool thing.
Right.
So that was a huge insight for me.
And the original goal was to just run a marathon.
Yeah. And the original goal with speaking to the team was just to get experience public speaking because I'd never done it before. And I learned a lot from that experience. Like one, you don't have to tell everybody everything in an hour. Like come up with one thing that you want them to walk away with. Keep it really simple. I actually had to make that mistake several times before I figured it out. Like you don't have to share everything that you want to tell them in an hour, just give them a little tiny nugget of information to sit with.
The funny thing is though, when you told the story of how bad that speaking engagement went, I thought, I don't know if it actually was bad or not though, because no matter how well it went, you would probably have it in your head that it didn't go well.
Yeah. I don't think it didn't go well. The coach was very complimentary.
Right.
But you know what? I got really excited and I said the F word a couple times. And because that is like my go-to word when I'm really excited or when I'm really like in pain, like giving birth to children or, a 6-hour race. Like that's the word for me that comes up a lot. And I got in the car and I had the thought like, that was really unprofessional. I shouldn't have said that in front of college kids. And that was it. The floodgates opened and I was like, oh my gosh, this is so embarrassing. And it just I just kept going with it. And then the 2-hour drive home turned into just all kinds of lies I told myself.
Well, don't beat yourself up today because you cursed on this podcast or for anything else. I'm sure there's an athlete that was in that audience that day who's like, and this lady came in, she used to swim there and she said this one thing and it changed how I looked at all of this. I would just love to get some actual other perspectives on how well that thing went. Cause I bet it went pretty well. You seem like a natural speaker to me.
Thank you. I can look back on it and I know that it was not horrible and that it was my thought process and perspective afterwards. That was the problem.
And of course you can get better at it and improve, but
because that is what I wanted. I just wanted like a easy opportunity. I wasn't getting paid. Like I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't really have my voice down or exactly how I wanted to go about talking about mindfulness and how it could be helpful. So it was a learning experience. And that's what I did as I learned from it. But now I should say from that, and this is another practice that if you're really hard on yourself, you can try this. Some people have resistance to this, so I'll just go ahead and say it out loud. It's okay if you find resistance to this. Is that after that experience, I started writing myself love notes. I call them love notes. You can call them whatever you want. You can just write yourself a Post-it note or you don't have to name it. And I just say Dear Micha, you were scared and nervous, but you did it anyways. You prepared. You did everything that you could to show up ready. And I'm really proud of you. That's it. I put that little bit of positivity or loving kindness before the onslaught of potential negative thoughts. And it kind of just giving yourself that little break for me helps, because it's like, oh, then my mind's not actively looking for the spiral, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it quiets Rhonda down.
Yeah, it quiets Rhonda down. She's like, damn, I don't have this opportunity to run my mouth right now.
Yeah.
And I don't do it all the time, but more so when I'm doing speaking events. I've found that helpful for me. So, and I've told other people too, and sometimes they're like, I'm not doing that. I think because I called it a love note, they're like, absolutely not. But it's just acknowledging, like, I am proud of myself. And did I do the best I could? Yeah. Okay.
Well, and there's no magic bullet that works for everybody.
No.
But if you have a problem with your Rhonda or your Frank, or the negative self-talk gets ramped up too high to a point where it's warping the experience from what it was, and it's not helping you to move forward and be better at whatever you're trying to achieve, then maybe you need a love note. Whereas somebody who, I'm trying to think of the example, but if they naturally give themselves love notes, right? Because you can have the opposite experience. Somebody that goes up there and gives a horrible talk, and clearly nobody liked it or got any value from it. And it was really self-indulgent from the person who was up there speaking. And afterwards they're like, man, those people are so lucky to see me. I am so awesome. Now that person might need to get in touch with their inner Rhonda or their inner Frank.
Yeah.
That says, hey, maybe we should look back on that and examine what wasn't perfect about it. Maybe they need to write themselves a note that says, like, what could I learn from that experience? What mistakes did I make? And what could be improved for next time? So I think there's different strategies for different people based on their wiring. And you got to find what works for you.
I think a consistency is king. Like, you need to do it consistently. That one I pull out when it's something that I know is going to be more activating for me. Like, that feels really scary. And I'm feeling all the feels for, then I can kind of bring it in and be like, oh, okay, just that's helpful. But it's all the other things that you do consistently, I think, that have the biggest impact. But like you said, like writing, what could I have done better? Or what did I do well?
Right. Depending on what you need.
Yeah.
And we were talking about this before we went on air, but I think all of this mindfulness training, an interesting idea is that you're setting the groundwork. It's almost like you're planting the seeds to be able to enter a flow state more often. And, it's a great time to read a little quote from Micha Shaw on mindfulness and flow. Because I think that's something that can get people excited about mindfulness, is if you can increase your odds of getting into a flow state.
Yeah.
Well, that feels amazing when you get there, and it's optimal performance. And so it's really this win-win human experience. Let's see what Mike had to say.
Okay.
To live fully means to experience each moment with the same clarity of purpose, with complete awareness of both our external surroundings and our internal states. True engagement requires us to harness our attention, directing it towards activities that bring enjoyment and purpose, no matter how simple or complex they may seem. This mindful engagement transforms ordinary experiences into profound moments of flow, where time fades, self-consciousness recedes, and we are left with the purest essence of what it means to live in harmony with the present.
I love that. That gives me the chills.
I miss him.
Yeah. What an amazing opportunity to learn from him.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I mentioned this to Hank, like I was in graduate school at that time, business school, but working every day alongside him and all the brilliant people that were at that research center and people he brought in. I mean, that was the real education. That was where the real learning was happening. And he would say amazing stuff like that all the time, like little throwaway comments. It's just like, what? Is this guy real? Like, yeah.
How have you experienced flow?
Sometimes with speaking, when it completely goes off a script and it's just happening, and there's some weird resonance between the message and the audience, it can happen there. Certainly with soccer back in the day. And I would say now with writing would be the most common place to get into it. And it certainly doesn't happen every day, but along the lines of what we're talking about. So the War of Art, which is my favorite book on creative pursuits and overcoming resistance, he talks about the idea in there, and he talks about writing specifically quite a bit, that a good practice is to sit down every day, ideally at the same time, but that's not always practical. Whatever it is, you're going to sit down every single day and you're going to allot some time. And that might be, let's say, 2 hours. You go, I'm going to write during that time. But the faucet doesn't always turn on when you write. And if you're going to do that, there's no phone, there's no YouTube. You're going to sit there and you could stare out the window or just look at that blinking cursor on the screen. But that's it. You got to just sit there with it until it happens. And it's really painful and really difficult, because there are days where you actually sit there for 2 hours and nothing of any quality comes out at all. But if you do that for a sustained period of time, just like he says in the book, eventually you train your brain to be like, it's writing time.
Yeah.
I don't get any excuses. I don't get to have any distractions. I don't get to do this. Endlessly, to be like, oh, this doesn't feel good, so I'm just gonna scroll for a while.
It doesn't feel good.
Well, it doesn't feel good to sit there and be bored.
No. I think is it the phone doesn't feel good? Being bored, I love being bored, but
then you're in a great place. When you can love being bored, I think you're especially in this day and age. And this is what this sort of writing training taught me to do, is to love to be bored, because that's when the ideas come. And eventually, once you break through that, the resistance and the struggle with not wanting to sit there and stare at the blinking cursor, then things start coming out. And some of it's good, some of it's bad, and you can go sort that out the next day. And eventually it builds up to moments of flow while you're writing. And now I find it's very easy to get into those moments of flow while writing. But it took a lot of, like anything,
consistency,
a lot of hard work, a lot of uncomfortable, tough moments to get there.
Which is the key, like that perspective, like being able to hold that, like it's gonna be uncomfortable. Like when you were talking about that, it makes me think of when I do a longer meditation, there's that resistance. Like my mind is like, no, I don't want to do this. And it's just like all these ideas. And then I'll start thinking like, oh, this is taking a long time. It's going to be over soon. And then I always tell myself it's going to be a lot longer. You have a lot longer to go. So just hang on. And then my mind kind of settles and I accept it. And then it's very brief, but there's like that little moment where you're like, oh, okay. And then my mind starts going like again, but it's like, you have to sit through that uncomfortable. You have to commit to the fact that not everything's going to feel good. And sometimes you just have to sit there and be uncomfortable and bored and without distractions.
Do you think that's also, Rhonda, like the same voice that steps in there and says, hey, this is going to take longer than you think it will, and you got to sit there through it?
No, that's not Rhonda.
It's a different voice.
It's a different voice.
Okay.
Yeah. It's like a accepting voice. Mm-hmm. It's like, just be here. It's going to be longer. Because there is that, I don't know, like sometimes I'm like, maybe I should just look at the clock, you know? I think it's been 15 minutes.
Oh,
I should look at the clock.
100%.
And I'm like, no, don't look at the clock. You don't. And that's where I started like, it's just going to, if you think it's going to be a lot longer than it is, you're like, oh, just sit back and relax. You're going to be here for a while. And then you're kind of like, oh, okay, I am going to be here for a little while. And it takes that sort of like edge off of maybe I should just look at the clock. And then I'm kind of guessing, you know, I think it's been 16 minutes now. And then if I do peek, it's like 2 minutes in.
Yeah, when meditating, the trick my mind will always play, because I usually will have like a bell or something go off at the end of the time.
Yeah, I do too.
And I always think like, I probably turned the phone off so it can't make the noise. It's already been 10 minutes or whatever the time limit is.
The volume's off.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it is so hard to not go check it.
Yeah.
But I feel like that's an athlete trick that's part of the training you get from athletics, whether you're somebody who wins US Olympic trials or not. Like if you're in a competitive environment for a long time and there's hard training involved, you do learn the lesson. There's some uncomfortable things you have to sit through because you know it's good for you in the long run.
Yeah.
And that's that voice that's talking you to that moment that's like, just settle in. It's probably going to be worse than you think. And that's okay.
Yeah. It's going to be longer. It's going to be harder. Yeah.
I hear that voice a lot while cold plunging.
Oh gosh. Yeah. I just don't want to do cold plunge. That's actually, I made two goals the first goal when I graduated college, I was like, I'll never hold my breath again unless I want to, which is not like an interesting goal. And then when I finished open water swimming, I was like, I will still not hold my breath unless I want to. And I will never be cold again. I'll never go in cold water again. And both of them I have realized over time are not very like great goals to make or very realistic. And the cold water one, I feel like I realized, this is keeping me from adventure, which was one of my core values. So I was like, this is keeping me from doing fun things. And I should probably embrace it a little bit more. But man, do I still feel that resistance about getting in the cold water.
Don't love the cold water.
I just don't want to do it. But I do when we're on like a trip and it's like we go in the ocean because Logan will stop and go in like any body of water, no matter how cold it is. And I don't want to, but now I do realize that it is a fun part of our adventures. Is like, there's a river, let's go jump in it. It adds to the experience.
It does. It does. It's the best example though of go do this thing that sucks for 2 to 5 minutes.
Yeah.
So you can feel really great afterwards for a very long period of time.
Yeah.
We're going to get, I think you and Logan, we got to get you guys in the plunge at the house sometime.
Yeah. Well, that's a high priority list for him is to get one in the house. And I think he's been looking at making one. And we have our pool, which isn't heated. So right now it's actually quite chilly, but I haven't got in it yet. I took a break from it. So I feel like I need to get my mind set on it again. Like I'm in the indecisive zone right now, which is always problematic for me. It's like, do I want to do this? And if I do, then I need to commit to it. But I also, part of me is like, maybe I don't need to do this. Like, I don't know how much of a benefit I feel like it is. I think that's why I'm not so super sold on it. Like when I do it, I'm like, okay, now I'm cold. I don't feel like a surge in like productivity or like mental like clarity.
Well, then
I just feel cold. So,
hey, not everything works for everybody.
Yeah.
I feel like it's one that really works for me, but that certainly doesn't mean that it works for anybody else. Like a lot of this stuff.
Yeah.
Maybe I don't need as many love notes.
Yeah.
And you don't need to be cold as often.
Yeah.
And we'll both be just fine.
That's true. I have a lot of confidence in my ability to endure pain and be tough. And I feel like with the cold water, it's like, I don't need to prove that to myself.
Right.
So there's a little, like, I understand the discipline part. I understand the like doing hard things consistently part. But I feel like that's not what I need.
I like this. Because I bring up the cold plunging so often in these podcast conversations, and it's always like a love fest on the cold plunging. And you're the first person that's pushing back on it a little bit, and I think you're making a lot of sense. I really like that. Let's have some different perspectives on this.
Yeah. Well, I think now there's like all of like, especially on social media, it's like do all the things, right? It's like a little overwhelming. I feel like do the things that you can, do what you can. Also do what like feels like. We have a sauna and I really do like the sauna. It feels uncomfortable and I don't like that so much. And sometimes it makes me feel anxious and I want to hop out. But generally, like I value it and I like it and I enjoy having it be part of my day. And there's other things I really like to do. I've also read like conflicting information about like the benefits of cold plunge for women, like the difference between men and women. And I'm not an expert on it. So I'm not like, but it's just put like seeds of doubt for me. It's like, is this important for me? Like, is this what I need to focus on? There's so many other things I think I'd rather give my attention to.
Well, we've all got to pick the things we're going to give attention to. And there's only so much willpower to go around.
Yeah.
So it should be whatever you pick, moving you towards where you want to go. And if it's not, why do it? I think the massive beneficial claims made online by people who are selling cold plunges should be taken with a huge, huge grain of salt.
Yeah.
I have seen stuff that it is beneficial in small ways. It's a little additive thing, but the big benefit is really the getting in the habit of doing hard things, just like you said.
Yeah.
And if you're going, well, I don't need that, then that's fine. You don't need that. I mean, there's a mutual friend of ours who I mentioned the book, Tim Ferriss's Tools of the Titans, which I thought was a really good book because each chapter is really short and focuses on one little thing that he learned from a different podcast guest.
Oh, cool.
And Jim said, there's so much. I feel like there's so much stuff and I'm being hit with that all the time. Like here's 8 million things you need to do to be an optimal human being. Like there's a chapter on the Marine who he makes his bed every single morning and makes it just perfect. That gets his day off to the right start. And for me, that was one that I was just like, I don't really care about that. I find I did it for a month and found no benefit from that.
Yeah.
And I don't necessarily care if the bed is perfect or not.
Yeah.
But I think you're hitting on something that's important there especially with what social media does these days. You don't want to get to a point where you're like, okay, I have 20 things I have to do in order to be an optimized person and be the best version of myself. It's much better to pick 1 or 2 and do those really well and run with them.
Totally.
Like I'm going to listen to my mindfulness coach and do that breath work that she assigned and be really good at that.
Yeah. I think it's also good to have, so I feel like everybody goes towards the, like, I'm going to ruin my nervous system and do everything that puts me in sympathetic overdrive. It's like cold plunge, sauna, super gnarly HIIT workout followed by like crazy strength training. I don't know, Wim Hof breath work, it's like all these things. But you also need to like train your body to hang out in the parasympathetic zone and like maybe take some nice deep breaths, like drink a cup of tea and read a good book. Like do something calm, and like those things have just the same amount of value, but we value the hard things all the time. And like, it's not interesting on social media to see how someone went to bed early and isn't drinking alcohol every day, but it is interesting to see someone wake up at 4 and run 14 miles and then lift weights and then cold plunge, sauna, holotropic breathing. I don't know, just like all the things. And it's like, oh, okay. Like now I feel really lazy because I, got up and drank my cup of tea and meditated.
Well, that's why it's good to define your own goals, what you want your life to look like, and take steps towards that and not spend an excess amount of time with social media where you are being force fed, whether you want to or not. Where if you're going to scroll, you're going to be force fed goals, other people's goals.
Yeah.
They're not yours. I mean, it's just like the Coach Berg said, don't decide how you want the 60 seconds with your kid to be after the match in the heat of the moment. Decide a month in advance. You're much more likely to have it actually be what you wanted it to be if you decide on your own for yourself what you want these moments to be.
Yeah.
Don't decide you're going to be a cold plunger because you saw 50 people on Instagram doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do find a big value in doing hard things. So,
yeah.
And it's interesting. We're talking about cold plunging and my resistance to getting in cold water for 2 minutes. But then I look up like, oh, maybe I should do an ultra or an Ironman and like torture myself for 12 hours straight or whatever it is. Like that's the kind of hard thing that I'd like to do.
Right. See, I have no interest in that.
Which is one takes 2 minutes. Like,
yes. Or is that like the marathon training? No way. I have so many friends who've done it and they rave about it and we can all train together and it's a blast. And I'm sure they do have a really good time, but I'm like, the amount of time that it would take, plus I just don't get I probably would get some rewards from it, but I have no drive to go run the marathon or especially the ultra marathon. It's just not my jam.
Yeah. And that's okay.
Yeah.
I think that's the thing is finding out like, what are the hard things that I am interested in and trying out? What are the, not soft, but like, what are the little practices I can bring in that will be the opposite of that will help me recover and show up ready the next day to put in the hard work. And it comes down to sustainability. Like, what can you do consistently? And for some people, adding 2 minutes of cold water a day seems insurmountable, but running 2 hours a day seems like, yeah, that could be fun. I'd like to build up to that. So
I really like the cup of tea and read a book, though. That's a good goal.
Yeah.
Because it's not anybody who is an athlete gets jammed down their throat athletic stuff by the algorithms.
Yeah.
I don't know how they identify that stuff, but everybody, I mean, these could be people that are like no longer in great shape, but they were a college athlete. They still get hit with it all day long. And, everybody gets what they get from the algorithms and they are so incredibly sophisticated at figuring out your personal history and sending stuff that will create engagement for good or bad.
Yeah.
It will engage you. And maybe there are people that get hit by the algorithm with like, you should read more. It's really good for your brain and your well-being and you will grow as a person. I have never seen it once on any of these platforms, which I try to not spend hardly any time on.
Yeah.
But I don't ever see it. And I find it's one of the best. I mean, for me, like the unplug and sit down and read for an hour. You have something interesting to say the next day. It's only upside for me.
Me too. After this past year, I've been on like a huge fiction kick and I just devour books and I love it. And there is a whole area on Instagram for people that read. Okay. All kinds of books, but yeah, it's out there.
I'm sure. I mean, there's the book talk.
I don't know if it's like necessarily like this is good for your mental health. Like, let's make this relaxing. It's like all the different books people are reading and then critiquing. But and
knowing Instagram is probably like, these are the 10 books I'm reading right now.
Yeah.
And it's always the humble brag and the high performance and a warping of just good things we all know we should do for ourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah. Brilliant insights from the Nick Standlea Show. Go read. And you don't have to cold plunge, even though I really like it.
You could read about cold plunging and then decide for yourself whether it's something you want to try out or not.
Yes. Yes. Although it's an experience all by itself. I think that's one you got to feel, not talk about.
Yeah. Same with meditation. But you got to do it. You can't, you can talk about it all day long, but until you actually do it. My best friend from college lives in Truckee, and we visit her at least once a year, and we've gone the last couple of years during the winter. And that is we always go with her in Lake Tahoe in the middle of winter. And that is very painful.
Well, see, you're doing it
and
already.
I do it. That though is like an adventure. It like adds to the experience and the camaraderie. And of course, Logan like walks out and he's in there for like 3 minutes and puts his head under, and I have my hands like this the whole time.
That still counts.
Clinging onto the ladder. But I do it.
Yeah, that does sound more exciting than like the barrel full of freezing water in Nick's backyard.
Yeah. But that's good for consistency.
Oh, yeah.
Mine's more just like random adventure cold plunging.
Okay, I forgot this one earlier from Brene Brown. Owning our story can be hard, but not nearly as difficult as spending our lives running from it.
Yeah, that's a good one. I'm working with an athlete right now where we talk a lot about like the story that we tell ourselves. Like, I'm good at this. I'm bad at this. It's like, are you really bad at that? Or is that just a story you're telling yourself? And what happens when you start to change that story or tell yourself a different one entirely?
That is a powerful practice when done right. I think especially with a coach.
Yeah.
This young gentleman came in here. I didn't put this on the podcast, but it's up on the Test Prep Gurus YouTube channel. We worked with him for SAT prep 6 years ago. He had emailed me and just said, hey, I just wanted to tell you how much all of the stuff I learned then helped me all through college. And now it's helping me at USC Law School. And it's just changed my life, the stuff I learned studying for the SAT. And I said, well, I don't want to do this over email. Like, you got to come in and we got to talk about this.
Yeah.
And I asked him, what were those things? He said, the self-fulfilling prophecy was the biggest one. I said, well, can you expand on that? Like, what does that mean? And he said, well, I was in this mindset of there were certain parts of the test that I couldn't do. I wasn't good at certain math skills. It's just, that's how it was. And the teacher said to me, if you tell yourself you can't do it repeatedly, that's going to become a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah.
And if you just start telling yourself you can, that could be a different kind of self-fulfilling prophecy. Yeah. Eventually, is there any reason you actually can't do it, can't learn this stuff? And it sounds so simple, but to hear this kid in his own words, he's like, I'd never thought about it that way. And he said it was really hard work and it took months and months of telling myself this different story. He's like, I kind of did it begrudgingly at the beginning. He's like, but once I saw it work just a little bit, suddenly I didn't even feel like I was telling myself the different story. I was living a different story.
Yeah.
And he liked to call it, he was living a different self-fulfilling prophecy. He was really big on that turn of phrase, but to use your language, he was telling himself a different story. And the reason the test prep thing, that piece of the test prep puzzle was transformative for him was, he said, then he got to college and he said, and sure, there were classes I had to take that I wasn't naturally good at, but I knew the trick now.
Yeah.
Just tell myself it's a matter of hard work and time and I'll get there. And he said, I never thought I could apply to law school. And he's like, let alone USC. But after this had all worked through college, then he was very practiced at telling himself the right story in order to get the result he wanted to get.
Oh, yeah. Because he shifted from, I can't do this, to like, I'm capable of figuring it out. And then that opens it up to, well, yeah, you can figure out all kinds of things.
Sure.
It's not as many limits.
Right.
Yeah.
None of us were born knowing how to walk.
No. Yeah. And we failed a lot before we started doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that does speak to the value of like working with a coach, though, is that when you have to speak things out loud, they can pick up on the way that you're saying things and hold you accountable to them. Just like today, when I'm talking about my experience and you're like, well, hold up a minute, then I already have that awareness about myself, but it adds to it, right? And it's like I can grow and improve from that. Whereas if I'm only in my head about it, it's harder to like understand the impact of my thoughts or my words that I'm saying out loud.
Yeah, if you're by yourself, you can trick yourself into justifying continuing with a pattern that has existed for a long period of time. You can trick yourself into that listening to Rhonda is okay, or whatever that thing might be that you're dealing with. I think that to your idea about journaling and writing things down, that is almost like a step of giving yourself someone else that you're talking to. And then you're reading back what you wrote. And it's not quite as powerful as a excellent coach, but it's a step in that direction.
Yeah. Well, and they can be complementary too, I think.
Absolutely.
I think that's the thing too, thinking about like working on your mindset is that I'm big on practices, right? Breath work, visualization, journaling, mental imagery. But there's also a lot of value in talking to someone, sharing how you feel, working through your emotions. And that is working on your mind too. That is working on your performance. And I think like I was taught to be tough and just put my head down and work and not like, I shouldn't be feeling emotions, right? And just to suppress them. But then as I got older, I was like, well, this is actually like my superpower is I am a really sensitive person. I think about things a lot. And that helps me work with athletes because I think about their situation and I can kind of be this, I really value curiosity. I know you do too, because your whole podcast is basically on curiosity.
Be curious.
But that's one of my core values that I like come back to all the time. It's like, can you be curious about your experience? And like now I get the opportunity to work with athletes and like I can lend them my curiosity at first and help them like grow that skill for themselves as well. And once you can really turn your perspective to this sense of curiosity for like, it just opens up so much of your life and navigate like resilience and navigating problems. Because rather than something being like a failure, you're like, oh, this is a problem to be solved. Like it almost makes it exciting. Like, how am I going to take this mistake and like catapult to the next level?
Yeah. You start focusing on that. How do you figure it out? Not can you or not?
Yeah.
It's
and
just
like back to the guy is like, well, now I know I'm capable of figuring it out. And then that opened up a whole world to him of like, yeah, maybe I can go to USC Law School. Like, what can I do from here? Like, there's so much potential there.
Sure. Have you read the book Quiet?
It sounds familiar, but I don't think I read it.
Oh, you should definitely check it out. You would love it. I mean, if sensitivity is your superpower and you described yourself as an introvert, that's what the book is about.
Oh, okay.
So it's called Quiet because for people that are naturally quiet. And initially, I think she was going to call it sensitive. Okay. But then the publisher was like, Quiet has a little more like juice to it. And it became a bestseller and was huge. I mean, maybe like, I don't know, 10, 12 years ago. But the entire book is about taking sensitivity and naturally being quiet. They're like, if you're quiet, well, then you're a great listener. And you think about other people's experiences, and these can all be turned into an array of superpowers. It's a wonderful book for anybody, whether they're introverted or extroverted.
Yeah.
Introverts find it an easy read, and extroverts, it's more like I could learn something from this.
Yeah. I'm going to buy that immediately because it was very empowering for me when I learned about introvert, extrovert, and that I was an introvert. It felt like very, like I understood myself better. And I was better able to take care of myself, but not from a place of judgment. Just like, it's okay that Logan, as you know, is like very extroverted. His family is so social. And when I first started dating him, I was like, why do I feel so like anxious over the 7-day Christmas extravaganza that never ends? And it's wonderful. And I love it. It's like family, everybody's together, good food, but it just does not. It's like you wake up in the morning, the party started, and you go to bed late, and then you wake up the next day and, oh no, it's another party. And I would be so exhausted by the end of it. And my friend, same one that lives in Truckee, she was like, I think you're an introvert. And, just means your battery, you just need to refill your battery and quiet. And I was like, oh my gosh, yes.
Yeah.
And it was such, like, I think about that too. It's actually, Logan actually started sending me things on like introverted marketing. He sent me this thing on introverted marketing. And I was like, I feel so seen right now.
Oh, this book is going to make you feel seen for sure. I mean, I love it. And I subscribe to that same definition of it, extrovert versus introvert. It doesn't mean you can't be extroverted.
Yeah.
It just means you need these quiet moments of recharging the batteries.
Yeah.
and some people, a true extrovert, their batteries are recharged by being around a bunch of people and having all this social interaction. And that's great for them. I personally consider myself, even though I am super extroverted, to be an introvert, because as much as I love a huge party and talking to lots of interesting people, I do need these quiet moments of reflection afterwards to recharge the batteries. Like I will go to empty if it's all just social, repeat ad nauseum.
Yeah.
And Jim loves to introduce me at parties as Nick the introvert because he thinks it's hilarious that I describe myself that way. He's like, you're the most extroverted person here. But yeah, I don't think it's about like, do you mix it up at the party? Yeah. It's really about those energy levels. And I had a professor it was in business school, actually, that defined it for me that way. And I was like, he's onto something there.
Yeah. And it is. It's just really helpful because then you're like, oh, if I just give myself, I'm going to go walk around the block by myself, or I'm going to go read for 20 minutes. I'm just going to do something quiet. And then, because I'm the same, like I do love socializing and I am a social person, but I have an expiration date. I feel it coming on and I can just go. I'm like, I'm good to go now. Where Logan is like, FOMO, like no one experiences FOMO like Logan. He's like, I need every moment of fun before I can leave and know that no one else is going to have any fun without me. Where I'm the opposite. I'm like, this is a good time for me to go now. You guys have fun. I'll see you later.
Right. Yeah, he is so much fun.
He is a lot of fun.
At a party when he is on. When he's on it, oh gosh. Yeah. I mean, it is a good time.
Yeah, it is. It's a special gift he has.
Yes.
But he also, I think, on the spectrum, because it is a spectrum, right? It's not like, oh, you're introverted, extroverted. Right. It's like he is, because I remember during wedding season when we were younger, we went to a lot of weddings, and people would come up to me and they're like, how do you live with him? Like, he is just so on. And I was like, this is not how he behaves every day. I'm like, he's not going to talk for a week after this. Like,
right.
He's quiet and he's calm. Like, he's so calm. Mm-hmm. And so he needs his quiet time too. But if he's really tired and, you know, you and Jim call him, he's like, oh, all of a sudden I have a little bit of energy. I think I could do it. Whereas I'd be like, I'm already in bed. I can't.
Right.
Yeah.
Let's wind this down with a final thoughts here on this note from Martin Seligman, the author of Flourish, which is another really good book.
I think I might have that book, but I haven't read it. I do have a book buying problem, so I have a lot of books I haven't read yet.
I'll just go for quiet. That's going to be a home run for you. That's like an easy win.
Pretty much immediately.
Yeah. I feel like we just set up the ball on the tee, and now you're going to be like, it's such an amazing. It's just a perfect fit. But from Seligman, mindfulness can foster a unique form of well-being, one that isn't merely about momentary pleasure or fleeting happiness, but rooted in a profound engagement with our thoughts, emotions, and actions in real time. It's the ability to step back, to see thoughts as passing mental events rather than as definitive truths about ourselves. By practicing mindfulness, we enhance our capacity for self-compassion, resilience, and acceptance, ultimately shaping a life where we can find meaning and joy in the here and now.
I love that. It's a pretty good way to end.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. Tell everyone hello, the kids, Logan. What just happened there? Okay, everybody. Until next time, ask questions. Don't accept the status quo and be curious.